Faites l'appel, s'il vous plaît, Madame le greffier.
Monsieur le connétable de Saint-Hélia, Madame le connétable de Saint-Laurent, Monsieur le connétable de Saint-Brelard,
Présent.
Monsieur le connétable de la Trinité,
Présent.
Monsieur le connétable de Saint-Pierre,
Présent.
Madame le connétable de Saint-Martin,
Présent.
Monsieur le connétable de Saint-Jean,
Présent.
Monsieur le connétable de Saint-Clément,
Présent.
Monsieur le connétable de Grouville,
Présent.
Monsieur le connétable de Sainte-Ouane, Monsieur le connétable de Sainte-Marie,
Présent.
Monsieur le connétable de Saint-Sauveur,
Présent.
Monsieur le député Southern, Madame le député Labbé,
Présente.
Monsieur le député Tadier, Monsieur le député Luce,
Présent.
Madame le député Dublé,
Présente.
Monsieur le député Morel,
Présent.
Madame le député Lehegara, Monsieur le député Ayer,
Présent.
Monsieur le député Ward,
Présent.
Madame le député Alves,
Présente.
Madame le député Gardner,
Présente.
Monsieur le député Gauss,
Présent.
Monsieur le député Farnham,
Présent.
Madame le député Moore, Monsieur le député Mezek, Monsieur le député Osef, Monsieur le député Balash,
Présent.
Monsieur le député Coles,
Présent.
Madame le député Poré, Monsieur le député War,
Présent.
Madame le député Miles,
Présente.
Madame le député Scott,
Présente.
Monsieur le député Renouf,
Présent.
Madame le député Curtis,
Présente.
Madame le député Feltham,
Présente.
Madame le député Binet,
Présente.
Madame le député Jern,
Présente.
Madame le député Miller,
Présente.
Madame le député Howell,
Présente.
Monsieur le député Binet, Monsieur le député Ferry,
Présent.
Madame le député Kovac,
Présente.
Monsieur le député Curtis, Madame le député Ward,
Présent.
Madame le député Wilson,
Présente.
Madame le député Stevenson, Monsieur le député Andrews,
Monsieur le doyen.
Notre aide soit au nom de Dieu, qui a fait le ciel et la terre. Amen. Seigneur Dieu, Père éternel et tout-puissant, qui a établi le gouvernement et la puissance de la terre, pour le règlement et pour la conduite du peuple, et qui nous a commandé d'avoir toujours pour but la gloire de ton saint nom. Nous te prions qu'il te plaise de donner à cette assemblée le don de conseil et de prudence, d'unir les cœurs et les affections de tous ceux qui la composent, de la conduire tellement toi-même par ton Saint-Esprit que toute leur délibération est accompagnée de ta bénédiction. Réussisse au bien-être et au soulagement du peuple qu'il te plut de commettre à leurs soins. Car nous t'en prions au nom et par les mérites de ton Fils bien-aimé Jésus-Christ, notre Seigneur, qui nous a enseigné à t'invoquer en disant: Notre Père, qui es aux cieux, ton nom soit sanctifié, ton règne vienne, ta volonté soit faite sur la terre comme au ciel. Donne-nous aujourd'hui notre pain quotidien, et nous pardonne nos offenses, comme nous pardonnons à ceux qui nous ont offensés. Et ne nous amène point en tentation, mais délivre-nous du mal. Car à toi est la règne, la puissance et la gloire, au siècle des siècles. Amen.
Monsieur le connétable de Saint-Hélia, Madame le connétable de Saint-Laurent,
Madame la connétable de Saint-Laurent est malade.
vous jurez que Madame le connétable de Saint-Laurent est tellement indisposée qu'elle ne peut pas assister aux états sans exposer sa santé. Monsieur le connétable de Sainte-Ouane,
Défait.
Monsieur le député Southern,
Présent.
Monsieur le député Tadier, Monsieur le député Mezek,
Présent.
Monsieur le député Osef,
Devo.
Madame la Deputy Stevenson.
Excusez on the grounds of parental obligations. Les États sont constitués. On behalf of members, I'd like to welcome His Excellency. To the chamber this morning. We now move to the first item of business, the Government Plan 2025 to 2028. Members have been furnished by the greffier with a proposed debate running order, and members will see that amendments shaded in blue within the order have been accepted by the Council of Ministers and therefore might not be debated separately unless the member requests this at the beginning of the debate before the proposition is read as amended. The 13th and 15th amendments have been withdrawn. Can I invite the Minister for Treasury and Resources to, Deputy Miller, are you content for the proposition to be read as amended by the 4th, 5th, 7th, 9th as amended by Part A, 10th, 11th as amended, 18th as amended by second amended, 24th as amended by second amendment, 26th, 27th and 29th amended, which have been accepted.
So is that 23 is amended rather than 24?
24 as amended by sorry? Forgive me.
Have you got 23?
Yes. 23rd, 26th, 27th and 29th amendments.
23rd is amended.
Yes.
23rd is amended, sir. Yes.
That's right. Thank you very much. Deputy Renniff.
Yes, I would like the 29th amendment on distillers' relief to be debated, please.
Thank you very much. Deputy Gardner.
Thank you. So you said that the amendment 14 was withdrawn. It hasn't been withdrawn.
The 13th and 15th have
Okay.
been withdrawn.
Thank you. And 23 is amended, and I accepted the amendments, and it can be read as amended.
Thank you very
Just
much. Deputy Gardner. Deputy Jern.
Yes, Amendment 24, I would like to debate.
That will be debated separately.
Yep.
Yes. So, Greffier, I invite you to read the proposition as amended by the 4th, 5th, 7th, 9th as amended by Part A, 10th, 11th as amended, 18th as amended by Second Amendment, 23rd, 26th and 27th. The 29th you wanted to debate, wasn't it, Deputy Renner? Yes. Accepted by the Council.
The States are asked to decide whether they are of opinion to receive the Government Plan 2025 to 28, entitled Budget 25 to 28, specified in Article 9.1 of the Public Finances Jersey Law 2019, the law, and specifically, A, to approve the estimate of total states income to be paid into the Consolidated Fund in 2025 as set out in Appendix 2, Summary Table 1 to the report, which is inclusive of the proposed taxation and AMPO duties changes outlined in the Government Plan, in line with Article 9.2a of the law, except that the total estimate for 2025, 2026, 2027 and 2028 vehicle emissions duty, VED, shall be increased to reflect increased duties for non-commercial vehicles with CO2 mass emissions above 176 grams, with the relevant figures in Appendix 2, Summary Table 1, updated in line with the following table and subsequent figures updated accordingly. B, to approve the proposed changes to approval for finance borrowing for 2025, as shown as in Appendix 2, Summary Table 2 to the report, which may be obtained by the Minister for Treasury and Resources, as and when required, in line with Article 9.2c of the law, of up to those revised approval amounts. C, to approve the transfers from one state's fund to another for 2025 of up to and including the amount set in Appendix 2, Summary Table 3, in line with Article 9.2b of the law, except that proposed transfers of money from the Consolidated Fund to the Climate Emergency Fund shall be increased in 2025, 2026, 2027 and 2028 to reflect increased duties for non-commercial vehicles with CO2 mass emissions above 176 grams, with the relevant figures in Appendix 2, Table 3, updated in line with the following table and subsequent figures updated accordingly. D, to approve a transfer from the Consolidated Fund to the Stabilisation Fund in 2025 of up to 25 million, subject to a decision of the Minister for Treasury Resources based on the availability of funds in the Consolidated Fund as at 31st of December 2024, in excess of the estimates provided in this plan, or from budgeted underspends identified before 31st of December 2025. E, to approve a transfer from the Consolidated Fund to the Agricultural Loans Fund in 2025 of up to 2 million, subject to a decision of the Minister for Treasury and Resources based on availability of funds in the Consolidated Fund as at 31st of December 2024, in excess of estimates provided in this plan or from budgeted underspends identified before 31st of December 2025. F, to approve each major project that is to be started or continued in 2025 and the total cost of each such project and any amendments to the proposed total cost of a major project under a previously approved government plan in line with Article 9(2)(d), E and F of the law and as set out in Appendix 2, Summary Table 4 to the report. G, to approve the proposed amount to be appropriated from the Consolidated Fund for 2025 for each head of expenditure, being gross expenditure less estimated income, if any, in line with Articles 9(2)(g), 10(1) and 10(2) of the law, and set out in Appendix 2, Summary Tables 5.1 and 2 of the report, except that in Summary Table 5.1, the head of expenditure for education and lifelong learning should be increased by 5,862,000, with an equal decrease to children and families' head of expenditure. Except that in Summary Table 5.1, the head of expenditure for the Cabinet Office should be reduced by 86,215, and the head of expenditure for customer and local services should be increased by 86,215 to support the funding of the Connect Me project. To approve the estimated, H, to approve the estimated income being estimated gross income less expenditure that each state's trading operation will pay into its trading fund in 2025 in line with Article 9(2)(h) of the law and set out in Appendix 2, Summary Table 6 to the report. I, to approve the proposed amount to be appropriated from each state's trading operations trading fund for 2025 for each head of expenditure in line with Article 9(2)(1) of the law and set out in Appendix 2, Summary Table 7 to the report. J, to approve the estimated income and expenditure proposals for the Climate Emergency Fund for 2025 as set out in Appendix 2, Summary Table 8 to the report, except that the proposed transfer of monies from the Consolidated Fund to the Climate Emergency Fund shall be increased in 2025 to reflect increased duties for non-commercial vehicles with CO2 mass emissions above 176 grams, with the relevant figures in Appendix 2, Table 8, updated in line with the following table and subsequent figures updated accordingly. K, to approve an updated and consolidated policy of the Strategic Reserve Fund as follows. The Strategic Reserve Fund, established in accordance with the provisions of Article 4 of the Public Finances Jersey Law 2005, is a permanent reserve only to be used, 1, in exceptional circumstances to insulate the island's economy from severe structural decline, such as the sudden collapse of a major island industry or from major natural disaster, 2, if necessary for the purposes of providing funding up to 100 million for the Bank Depositors Compensation Scheme established under the Banking Business Depositors Compensation Jersey Regulations 2009, including to meet the state's contribution to the scheme and or to meet any temporary cash flow funding requirements of the scheme. 3, to support the development of future healthcare facilities and the borrowing costs for such work in line with a financing strategy agreed by the Assembly. 4, as a holding fund for any or all monies raised through external financing until required, and for any monies related to the repayment of debt raised through external financing used to offset the repayment of debt as and when required. And 5, in accordance with Article 24 of the Public Finances Jersey Law 2019, where the Minister for Treasury and Resources is satisfied that there exists an immediate threat to the health or safety of any of the inhabitants of Jersey, to the stability of the economy in Jersey, to the environment for which no other suitable funding is available. L, to approve the transfer to the Strategic Reserve of the amounts due as a result of the move from prior year basis taxation after the 31st of December 2025, as and when these payments are received, estimated at 280 million. M, in relation to the new Government Headquarters Office, to approve 1, the exercising of the option to acquire the new Government Headquarters, estimated at 91 million, by the public of the island in line with the pre-agreed terms. And 2, the acquisition of the new government headquarters as an investment of the Social Security Reserve Fund, including authorising the meeting of expenses incurred in connection with the acquisition. And 2, the subsequent leasing of the new government headquarters by the public of the island from the Social Security Reserve Fund, with commercial terms to be agreed between the Minister for Infrastructure on behalf of the public and the Minister for Social Security and the Minister for Treasury and Resources, both on behalf of the fund. And N, in relation to the new government headquarters, to authorise HM Attorney General, the Greffier of the States, and the Ministers for Infrastructure, Social Security and Treasury and Resources, and the public of the island, to enter into such arrangements, including financing, and pass any contracts as are necessary to put into effect paragraph M. O, to approve, in accordance with Article 9(1) of the law, the Government Plan 2025-28, as set out in the appendix to the accompanying report, except that, on page 14, after the words "support the ongoing well-being of islanders," there should be inserted the following words. As part of the prioritisation of community well-being, the Social Security Department has allocated $391,215 of funding to the Connect Me project for the year 2025 to ensure the continuation of the project and support the introduction of social prescribing. Except that in the section Vehicle Emissions Duty on page 32, after the words "the highest 3 emission bands will be increased to," replace the figures 5%, 10% and 20% with the figures 5%, 15% and 25%, with the relevant figures in Table 5 and Table 6 updated accordingly. Except that on page 38, A, after the words "improve the competitiveness of the island," there should be inserted the words "with a specific focus on funding the delivery of sustainable finance action plan and supporting the transition to a net zero economy." Except that on page 4, after the words "for indicative purposes," there should be inserted the following new paragraph. The establishment of a public services ombudsperson, as approved in principle by the States Assembly in March 2018, P.32 2018, and progressed by the preceding government, remains under review by the Council of Ministers. The Complaints Panel is itself conducting review of its own procedures and processes. In July 2024, the Jersey Law Commission published a report entitled "Keeping the Complaints Panel or Creating the Ombudsperson," which worked through the different choices about the basic design of Jersey's independent complaints handling body, with the aim of taking an informed decision as to whether to keep a reformed complaints panel or go forward with the ombudsperson. Subsequent to that report, a consultation paper was published. The Council of Ministers will fully consider the consultation results published by the Jersey Law Commission and Complaints Panel, respectively, when considering the appropriate way forward. Detailed proposals will be brought forward in 2025 for States Assembly approval and also detailed in the successive government plan. Except that on page 43, after the words "this investment will meet the cost of enhancing grants to students, both in distance learning and in-person learning," should be inserted the words "we will also review the scheme available for apprenticeships and increase the funding and support available." Except that in the section "other revenue expenditure growth spending," on page 45, after the words "funding of in vitro fertilisation," recently approved by the Assembly, there should be inserted the following new paragraph. Funding for the termination of pregnancy, Jersey Law 1997, Amendments Work Stream, will be reviewed to ensure that both policy and law drafting resource for this work stream is prioritised by the Council of Ministers in the 2025 legislative programme, and in order for amendments to the current outdated law to be lodged prior to the end of 2025. Except that on page 46, under the subtitle "Formula-Driven Growth," for the words "as budget for arts, heritage and culture have now been increased to 1% of net revenue expenditure, in future this level will now be maintained and increased by RPI," substitute the words "following approval of funding for culture, arts and heritage, P69 of 2024, the government continues the commitment to maintain funding to the sector based on 1% of overall state's revenue expenditure." Except that on page 59, after the words "in subsequent budgets are subject to affordability," there should be inserted the following new paragraph. "Existing resources will be utilised to take forward the work to deliver a play strategy for Jersey in conjunction with the Minister for Children and Families, the Minister for Education and Lifelong Learning, and the Minister for Sustainable Economic Development, as detailed with Proposal 29 of the Bridging Island Plan 2022-25, with the work of the Jersey Youth Parliament Right to Play Group, and of the previous Play Strategy Steering Group to be incorporated into the final strategy, except that on page 59, after the words "in subsequent budgets subject to affordability," there should be inserted the following new paragraph: across the period 2025 to 28, up to 500,000 with the infrastructure rolling vote public realm will be used to support St Heliers neighbourhood improvement area programmes, provided always that additional matching funding is contributed by the ratepayers of the parish of St Helier to meet the costs of the relevant projects.
Thank you, Grafia. I invite the Minister for Treasury and Resources to propose the proposition. Minister.
Raise the DFO on Deputy Joseph, please.
Members content to raise the defo, Joseph? Defo is raised. Yes, Minister.
Sir, I think there was one line missing from the proposition. Sorry, I've now lost it, sorry. The Article 29, sorry.
The bottom of page
Do you have-
5, except that on page 33.
Yeah, except on page 33, for the figure £40,000 should be substituted £20,000 as a consequence of Amendment 29.
Yes, that's because Deputy Renouf asked that Amendment 29 be debated separately.
Apologies.
That's why that wasn't raised. Yes, Minister.
Thank you, sir. I am pleased to present the 2025 budget, a funded and balanced plan designed to meet the objectives of the common strategic policy that this Assembly has agreed on. Whilst this budget meets the requirements of the Public Finance Law for a government plan, it now uses the more relatable and familiar title of a budget. However, this budget is not only a financial plan for the coming year, but it also provides a clear and sustainable roadmap for the next 2 years, focusing on addressing the most pressing needs while delivering results for islanders. As always, compiling a budget requires choices to be made, and in some cases these are difficult ones. We always want to deliver for the islanders we serve, but a good budget will also ensure that proposals are affordable and that the choices made support the long-term sustainability of the island, its economy and its finances. Jersey's economy has proven resilient to changing global economic fortunes. Our economy has grown strongly in the last few years, and this growth has benefited businesses, islanders and the government. Tax revenues have also grown strongly, largely driven by banking profits, which in turn have been driven by interest rates. This strong growth in tax revenues will not last forever. Tax revenues are forecast to grow at much lower rates in the coming years. In turn, this means that government spending cannot continue to grow at the rates we've seen in recent years. In line with our commitment to support islanders with the rising cost of living, we have taken measures to keep money in islanders' pockets. We are increasing tax allowances and raising thresholds. This will alleviate some of the financial pressures on households. Jersey's tax thresholds and allowances for islanders remain the highest in comparison with the other Crown dependencies and the UK, who have continued in the UK to freeze their allowances and thresholds. Additionally, this budget freezes duties on alcohol and fuel for 2025, a decision that supports both our local businesses and their customers. These measures align with our CSP commitment to minimise government fees and charges. We recognise the challenges islanders face and are committed to making a difference through actions that are both affordable and sustainable. This budget reflects our dedication to making a tangible, lasting difference through prudent, affordable and sustainable actions. Rather than continuing a trend of unsustainable growth, this budget uses a more careful and considered approach to funding, focusing on reprioritising expenditure and curbing growth in the public sector. This will help focus taxpayers' money on the things that make the most difference. We have done this in a way that ensures that the quality and availability of essential services remain intact. This work has enabled us to make targeted investment in support of our CSP. For example, the new investment to make sure that every child in primary school has a nutritious school meal, investment in lifelong learning and skills, and funding to ensure the recommendations of the Violence Against Women and Girls Task Force are implemented. Healthcare, as we all know, is both an essential service and a significant expenditure. To address immediate deficits, this budget allocates an additional £31 million to health services, in addition to the 2% annual increase over and above inflation, a further £6 million. However, we also acknowledge that this level of funding increase is unsustainable in the long term. Gaining control over healthcare spending will continue to be a top priority as we strive to balance high quality care with financial sustainability. The plan commits to a programme of considered savings, adding up to over £30 million by the end of 2028. We have allocated the savings with clear plans for delivery designed to protect frontline services. Key measures include streamlining government operations by removing unnecessary management layers, eliminating vacant positions, and reducing reliance on consultants and temporary staff. Additional savings will be achieved through office consolidation and limiting legacy spending growth. We will also undertake a review of arm's length and regulatory organisations, ensuring they operate efficiently and in alignment with our island's strategic needs. In addition to these savings of £30 million, the Health Financial Recovery Plan will continue to identify opportunities to enhance cost management and improve services, reinforcing our commitment to fiscal responsibility and service delivery, and bringing health spending under control. Over the next 4 years, we are committed to a reprioritised and deliverable capital programme with a focus on renewing St Helier and maintaining our core assets. Central to this is the construction of new healthcare facilities, an important investment for our community's health and well-being. We are introducing a robust financing strategy that commits £710 million to ensure its timely and successful delivery. This is a significant undertaking and a necessary investment in our community's health and well-being. To underpin our financial strategy and strengthen our economy, we have already agreed in this Assembly to introduce the Pillar 2 corporate tax framework. Revenue from this initiative will not fund recurring departmental spend, but will instead support strategic, long-term investments that ensure Jersey's sustainability and resilience. As Treasury Minister, I am committed to safeguarding and growing our island's financial reserves. We are taking positive action in this budget to bolster the strategic reserve with a transfer of the prior year basis taxation debtors to generate cash for the fund over the coming years. We have also committed to using some of the receipts from Pillar 2 to strengthen our balance sheet, including rebuilding the Stabilisation Fund, to ensure that we are prepared to navigate economic uncertainties with confidence. Furthermore, the Social Security Reserve will be investing in the purchase of our new office building, an investment that will generate good returns for the fund whilst also keeping rental payments within the wider public sector. The 2025 budget is a robust, forward-looking financial plan that places islanders at the heart of our decision-making. It balances investment with prudence, growth with sustainability and action. By investing in our island, supporting our community and preserving our resources, this budget lays the foundation for a resilient and prosperous Jersey. Together, we are shaping a future where Jersey remains fair, thriving and responsive to the needs of its people. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Minister. Is the proposition seconded?
Yes, sir.
We now move to the amendments, which will be considered in the order in which they affect the proposition as lodged. According to the first amendment to debate is the 25th amendment proposed by Deputy Ozef. Deputy Ozef, would you wish to have this one amended, this amendment as amended by your own amendment read?
I'm slightly caught off guard, sir, because I didn't, that's not in the running order that I've had, but I certainly, this is the amendment. I am not accepting the Council of Ministers.
This is your own amendment.
My own
the 25th
amendment, yes, of
amendment. So that please, will the graphier read the 25th amendment as amended?
Page 2, paragraph A. After the words Article 92A of the law, insert the words, except that in summary table 1, the income estimate for stamp duty in 2025 should be reduced by 10,500,000 to reflect the cost of introducing a stamp duty holiday during 2025 based on the income forecasting group's estimates from May 2024, the reduction of income being based upon stamp duty being levied at 0% on properties valued up to 700,000, at 2.5% for those valued between 700,000 and 1 million, and with a taper for those valued between 1 million and 1,200,000, and properties over 1,200,000 remaining subject to stamp duty at the full rate, such reduction to exclude buy-to-let properties. Page 4, paragraph O. Oh, no, sorry. That's a
Grafia, no, I think you possibly think so, because it amends here, you see, as well.
Sorry about that. Page 4, paragraph O. After the words set out in the appendix to the accompanying report, insert the words, except that on page 30, after the words the previous forecast, there should be inserted the words, in order to promote a positive increase in the sale of residential properties, a stamp duty holiday has been instigated for 2025, allowing properties up to a value of 700,000 to pay no stamp duty, with stamp duty levied at 2.5% on properties valued between 700,000 and 1 million, and a taper for properties valued between 1 million and 1.2 million. Properties over 1.2 million will remain subject to stamp duty at the full rate. This stamp duty holiday will exclude buy-to-let properties.
Deputy Ozef.
Thank you, sir. If you members will just bear with me for one moment, because I was not expecting this to be the first one, so I'm just getting my remarks up on my feet. Sir, there is no doubt, as I explained on the radio this morning, that there has been a housing crisis which many members of this Assembly got elected on. And the continuing situation of the housing crisis is one in which that this Assembly is still grappling with. And I am proposing for a amendment to introduce what is will be familiar to those members of the Assembly who were in the Assembly at the time on the advice of the FPP when we had a previous financial crisis, that there is an appropriate time for a targeted temporary reduction in stamp duties up to a certain level. Now, this measure is not just about numbers or revenue, it is about restoring confidence in addressing affordability and getting our housing market moving again. We are, as all members will know, in the midst of a housing crisis. Transactions in the property market are and have been at a historic low. This stagnation is having a ripple effect throughout the economy. Families are unable to upsize. Those second-time buyers, first-time buyers, we know are struggling to enter the housing market. There's been some interventions in that, but limited. And the broader economic activity, which is of the concern that I have, that maybe has not been debated or really the subject of much activity, is of a real concern. My amendments, sir, are not in any way, as portrayed by the Housing Minister in his radio interview this morning, of vested interests. Members will be aware that I have been absent from this Assembly for a few months. And so what I did is I went to go and speak with my parishioners in St Saviour to understand and ask them, not to talk at them, but to listen to their concerns. And I was struck repeatedly by the amount of parishioners who are in the situation of either trying to sell a home. Members from all over the island will see for sale signs up everywhere, and there is yet a surplus of accommodation that is on the market. We know about the affordable problem, but why is the market not moving? The market is not moving. Transactions are, and even the FPP put forward in their, and I'm not going to be, if I may say, criticised in the government's report, a response to this, for a comment about the fiscal policy panel. I brought the fiscal policy panel to this assembly to get the uncomfortable messages that are in it. And there are some uncomfortable messages in the fiscal policy panel, now overseen by Sir John Cunliffe, who is an economist of high regard. And I know that my proposals as a targeted, timely and temporary intervention is absolutely necessary. It's necessary for the very people that are affected in the whole chain of the housing market. When transactions are low, which because of interest rates undoubtedly they are, there is a whole chain of individuals who are affected. Members will be aware of the amount of construction industry failures. I only heard this morning of a tiler who has faced an £80,000 unpaid bill from a failing construction firm. That's an ordinary Jersey tradesperson. There are many of them. The order books for construction is very thin next year, with the exception of the Andium-led projects. There is a lack of confidence. And so when dealing with a market that is not moving, one is advised by experts that one deals with frictions. What is it preventing? What is preventing people from buying and selling? Governments and assemblies who try to do price controls are very unwise to do so. It normally bites them back harder later. And I'm not suggesting that the government is trying to price control, but it is worrying to hear the housing minister say that he wants to see a continuation of lower house prices. It's all very well, we all would like to see lower house prices, but what does that do about confidence? We know house prices have come off the top. In real terms, with inflation, people have to accept that the offer that they're going to get, or the offer on of the property that they're selling in virtually all the sectors, is much lower. In real terms, it's much lower than it was. Now, why is it that the market is not moving? It's moving because of one of the frictions that exists, which is stamp duty. And I started trying to put this amendment over 8 weeks ago, and I've faced extraordinary difficulties, and somebody who has led budgets and knows the budget approach, and I think has led 8 budgets through this assembly, I'm well aware of the difficulties and the legislative implications, because this proposal in principle then needs to be passed into legislation, and my proposal can be quickly and made into legislative amendments in the finance law. The UK and other jurisdictions have shown that targeted stamp duty holidays does effectively stimulate market activity. We have an opportunity to learn from those examples and implement a policy that is tailored to Jersey's unique housing market. This is a time-limited intervention. It is just 1 year. It is a practical and cautious approach to address the current crisis without creating long-term distortions in the market. Markets adjust. Markets will adjust, and people are going to have to come to terms with the fact that the market has adjusted to lower prices. And what we have heard from the industry practitioners, who have not been those that have told me to bring this amendment to portray this as was done by the Housing Minister on BBC Radio Jersey this morning as being invested interests. So I wrote this amendment myself, every word of it. And I have only sought support from actors in the property market and estate agents and builders since lodging it, which is why I haven't done a lot of social media things about it. I wanted to get my proposals before this assembly and then see what the response. And I regret almost that there's been such a short time in being able to do that because of the difficulties I had. This is about giving what Cyril Lamarcon, the great late Cyril Lamarcon, Senator Cyril Lamarcon said, and he said, and it is repeated in the late Colin Powell, CBE's book, The Economist That Made a Difference in Jersey. I don't think any member would say that Colin Powell was wrong in many of the things that he did for us. We are an island that is benefiting from those wise decisions from the Cyril Lamarcon and onwards. And Mr. Lamarcon, Senator Lamarcon, used to say confidence is the name of the game. Our housing market is not confident. It's not moving. There is a surplus of supply in apartments in St Helier, and there are people that are then affected by the chain. One parishioner, a lady, I won't name her, has seen the flight of her two sons into jobs. One has got onto the property ladder and she would like to downsize. That is a good thing. It would release a family home into the market and she would move into a smaller property, more appropriate to her needs. But she's stuck. She can't sell. There is the arguments about those that are at the bottom. If the market isn't working at the bottom, and that's where the supply is, then the whole chain gets into almost a stagnated situation. And that lack of transactions, and the Treasury Minister is advancing effectively, and I do not criticise in any way a Treasury Minister who has to be tough. I've been in that seat having to be incredibly tough and asking states members to make difficult decisions. But my decisions have always been decisions which have an eye on the medium to longer term. Stamp duty revenue has been falling off a cliff in the last few years. That means there's less money to spend for the health department. If the stamp duty would have been at that previous levels, tens of millions of pounds would have been available to this Council of Ministers and this Assembly to spend. But it isn't. So if the Treasury Minister, and I'd appreciate if Deputy Mezek could keep his remarks a little more quiet whilst I'm speaking, I would, because I've lost my train of thought, I would suggest that it is the activity of the very people that are the St Helier voters that are brilliantly voting reform into this Assembly. This isn't about rich people. This is about ordinary working Jersey people, retired people, people wanting to get onto the property market. Stamp duty is a friction. Economists, as Dame Kate Barker said on a podcast 2 weeks ago, economists dislike stamp duties intensely because they act as a friction for average homes. They're fine for high-level homes. I've got no issue. That's why my proposal, sir, has been carefully crafted. It is giving a relief for up to 700,000 properties. And yes, I have had to unhappily accept that Jersey's house prices are so high. There's a 3-bedroom average house. It is in excess of 700,000. It's certainly less than it was before. And my proposal is carefully targeted. It doesn't have a cliff edge. It's 0% up to 700,000. It is at a lower level of 2.5% up to $1 million, and it's tapered off up to a level of 1.2 million. A property seller, a property buyer gets no relief under my proposals for a property over 1.2. And that powerfully makes the point, as a number of the respondents, and some of them have been estate agents. I've seen a blog cast this morning from one leading estate agent explaining the difficulties that they are having with the market at the bottom not moving, which has all of the effect that the chains collapse. If the chains don't start working, they will not transact. And it is not correct to say that we are at anything like the kind of volumes of transactions that were hoped for. I wish it would have been the case. Since the budget was amended, there has been a hardening of mortgage interest rates. Mortgage interest rates were announced on the BBC. The fixed rates, which many people are going to be coming off in the next few months, a huge concern. There was a lot of people, there was an abundance of credit from one particular lender that meant that house prices became unaffordable. I agree with that. But now those people are faced with having a fixed rate, which isn't the fixed rate that was estimated earlier this year, it's 1% higher. Worse than that, in Jersey, it is 100 fully basis points higher than that. So we're not going to see this stimulus that falling interest rates are going to provide. That means the time to act is to make a sensible intervention. That's what's actually going to deliver if the Treasury Minister still, I hope she is, proposing the budget next year. This stamp duty will come to an end. Holiday will come to an end. And there will be confidence restored in the market. That will mean that her stamp duty revenues, and this Assembly can change and tinker them with them and raise them for higher value properties if they wish, they can be restored so that the Treasury Minister has those resources available to her for allocating to much needed frontline services. This is a necessary. I asked the Housing Minister when the budget was lodged, and I know many members, and it's going to be a feature of this debate, that many members have found it really difficult to find out actually what the detail is. The head of the Corporate Services Scrutiny Panel has said that she has found it difficult to actually scrutinise this budget. I found it difficult to scrutinise what the numbers actually are. All I know is that the transaction volumes are not returning to normal. And it would be a falsehood to say they are. And if the minister's going to stand up later and say, oh, they're back up, well, I can tell in the third quarter of last year, it was the Lime Grove, I call it Lime Grove, it's the development sponsored by Andium that presided, that had 35 houses going through the market. There is an illusion that the 35 apartments, I think they were, that were going through on that quarter is indicative of the green shoots of recovery that the Housing Minister was talking about. No, that's not. That's the states doing the right thing by finding affordable homes going through the market. That is not a market that's showing green shoots. And if the green shoots were hoped for with interest rates coming down, they're not. They're going up. They went up last week. So, sir, there has not been a big debate about this, which I am really sorry about, but this Assembly can make amendments. We are here to debate, and I ask ministers to respectfully debate this on its merits. There is little else in this budget to stimulate demand, to stimulate supply. There is very little. We've seen construction firms getting out. If we think we can nationalise and somehow get everybody into social rented housing, this is nonsense. We've got private sector rentals. We'll come on to that surcharge debate later. This does not affect the surcharge. This is not, I've excluded second homes from this targeted temporary and timely relief. This is about homeowners. This is about getting people who want to downsize, upsize, second size, or whatever, getting the housing market moving. And if I'm successful in persuading members of the merits of this, which have been proven to work elsewhere, that we're not going to be scared into this apocalyptic situation where we're going to lose £10.5 million. Well, I've got one final thing to say to the Treasury Minister. Even if I am wrong about the estimate that's been advanced as the cost of my proposal, even if she's right, which I don't think she is, with greatest of respect, with the amount of transactions that I saw going through the Royal Court last week. The Royal Court is not suddenly going to see an abundance of activity on the 1st of January that's going to be this restoring of value. The Treasury Minister is going to have one actually advantage. Interest rates staying longer, as she said in her opening remarks, our economy has proven resilient. It has proven resilient in terms of its income because of our financial services industry. And our financial services industry makes more profits when interest rates are higher. So the good news is that there's going to be another revision. I understand why the Minister wouldn't do that, because members would say that we were getting money to spend, but we know, she knows, the advisors know, that there's going to be bigger profits from financial services as a result of interest rates remaining higher for longer, both in this year and next year. So you can argue this in a number of different ways. The actual cost, I think, is penny wise and pound foolish. I'm not interested in short-term games. I'm interested in long-term confidence. I'm interested in giving islanders that are currently stuck, that can't buy or sell, that are faced in miserable situations, the firms that are being affected by having built in good faith apartments. That's Jersey companies, Jersey people building that can't sell their properties because the market is stagnated. Those are the people that are building the affordable apartments in St Helier, but they can't sell them. This is an amendment which can boost confidence, that will boost confidence. It is targeted. It is not going to be of any benefit to those expensive properties of over 1.2 million. It doesn't even have a cliff edge. It has a gradual taper. The arguments are compelling. Members must know the difficulties. They must surely have heard of their constituents that can't buy or sell their properties, that are suffering because of it. They must be aware of all of the related trades that government relies upon income from GST. And the final thing I would say is, if this is about estate agents, well, sir, I've advanced many times in this assembly competition. And for the first time, there is a new service available in Jersey, like other places, for people to actually sell their own home at minimal cost. What a good idea! What a good innovation! If it works, I wish them luck. I also obviously don't decry estate agents at all, because they've got a job. But competition works, and sometimes, and I know that I've met people that are so interested, so enthusiastic. I won't say desperate, but some of them are desperate to sell their own homes. They actually can now, for the first time ever, sell their own home themselves at a lower cost. So this intervention comes just at the right time. If they're really motivated to sell their home, they can do it themselves, can save money on estate agency fees if they choose to, and they will not pay that friction of stamp duty. That will make the market work. And I urge members to give respectful, proper consideration to the impact on ordinary working people, ordinary retired people across the island. There's nothing else in this budget that's going to give confidence. This will. And I move the amendment, sir.
Thank you, Deputy. Is the amendment seconded?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Does any member wish to speak on the amendment? Conatava St Clement.
Sir, I find myself conflicted, and therefore I won't be taking part in the debate, and I'll be abstaining from the vote, sir. Is that okay?
Thank you.
Thank you.
There's no interest to declare.
Yes, I have some real estate which may come to the market next year, and it may benefit me from the amendment being passed if it's passed.
So for the avoidance of doubt, I am a property owner, but I have no intention of selling anything or buying anything.
Deputy Gorst?
Sir, in light of the Constable of St Clement's declaration, I must make a similar declaration. Being a property owner, one can never say whether one will come to the market or not during the course of any given year, but I expect at least one might. I'm not sure, sir. I would value your ruling on whether that means I need to leave the debate and not vote. If that is your position, then I will follow your advice.
No, under... It's understanding Order 106, which we're all familiar with now. If you're about to sell a property, you may wish to declare an interest, but most members of the Assembly will own property, and whether or not you're about to sell a property or not, it's an interest shared with a wide number of people, and therefore all members can vote if they wish. Deputy Binney?
Sorry, sir, are you saying that all members can vote regardless of whether they're intending to sell property?
Yes,
I do
understanding
consider
Order
myself-
106,
Okay.
which I'll just turn up. In the event that the interest being declared is a financial interest which is personal to that member, so unique to that member, or which is shared with a small number of other people, the member shall not vote on any proposition relating to the matter. So in view of the fact that buying and selling property in Jersey will be common to a significant number of persons, members with such an interest may vote in this debate. If members wish to declare an interest, then of course they must, if they regard themselves as having an interest in the outcome of this debate. In my judgment, that doesn't arise in relation to someone who merely owns property, but probably does in relation to someone who is about to buy or sell a property. Connotar of St Peter.
Sorry, I just wanted to make a similar declaration. I may actually gift a property to a family member in the new year, so I don't think that actually gives me any benefit under this, but make a declaration anyway.
Deputy Hegarrow.
So similarly, it is very likely that a property that I am a quarter owner of is likely to go for sale.
Sir, I have been in communication with lawyers about transferring a property interest too.
Thank you. Deputy Ward.
I just wanted to speak, sir.
Well, in that case...
Unfortunately, sir, I don't want to disappoint my children. I won't be gifting them anything.
I thought that's what you wanted. That's why I came to you last. Deputy Ward.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. And it's there's one very good thing that's come from this proposition and listening to the Deputy's speech. It means that I, sir, Reform, and any other member of this Assembly will never again have to take a lecture on fiscally responsible economics from the Deputy proposing this. So this is looking to remove up to £10.5 million from revenue for something that there is no evidence that will have any real impact on the market. It's just hearsay and hope. Indeed, sir, if there is evidence, I believe the evidence is more about inflating house prices during 2025 and then a sudden drop in transactions in 2026 as any sort of rush happens as we make some tenuous and short-term jump in our provision. So my concern is that where is this £10.5 million coming from? From the Consolidated Fund, well, there are many, it seems, a plethora, great to use that word, a plethora of amendments that are going to take from a consolidated fund that is very soon not going to be very consolidated. So in order to have minimal impacts. So the greater impacts that we can have for people on this island are to improve their wages, to provide nursery care. And if we can work and provide the 15 hours of NEF care for young families, that'll make a significant impact on their incomes, significant freeing up of money for those families to perhaps enter into buying a home in some way. The assisted house purchase scheme is far more important, which is a realistic way for people to get into their own home. And so I know, we talk about, the Deputy talks about talking to people in his constituency. So I speak to many young people. I have 2 children who, one doesn't live here, one does, and they've done everything right. They've gone to university, they've studied, they're working, they're paying their tax, they're doing everything they possibly can. But because of high rents, and because unfortunately, sir, I've spent my life in public service, I'm not massively wealthy, I'm okay, we've got a home to live in, I'm not complaining. They will really struggle to get on to buy a home. A stamp duty holiday for next year will make no difference to that. The most important elements to them are interest rates, their incomes, and their outgoings. And that's what we have to address. And so that's what I want to see happening. But what this fiscally irresponsible approach does is it puts at risk the projects that we want to take on. It puts at risk the work that we will do for nurseries, for families who are the future of this island, if we're going to talk about the futures of this island. It puts at risk, sir, the development of a skilled workforce. The greatest impact that we can have as a small island is to have a well-trained, well-paid workforce that will contribute to our economy effectively and in the long term. Those are the plans that we have. And so I was very happy, just to break off for 1 second, to accept the amendment on apprenticeships, because that's exactly the work we're already doing. Indeed, so I believe there'll be more money going towards that with the living wage support that will come forward as well, which is extremely pleasing to see. And yes, sir, we have to remember we are in an odd situation at the moment in this Assembly because we're working on the government plan and the funding from the previous government. Of course we are. But this is the next step forward into the coming years. And so I would ask members to be very, very careful in the decisions they make today, particularly on this amendment, as to where that money is going to go from and the impact it will have on the other areas of the CSP, which I remind members they voted for almost unanimously. Those key areas of development that were brought about rapidly and with thought as to what the impact will be for this island. So, sir, I urge members, think very carefully before you accept, I don't know what to call it, I suppose. There was an element of the Liz Truss, sir, in these ideas, which was really concerned me. And I just think that this offer of this simplistic solution to a complex issue that faces our island, please, I would say to members, sir, think this through carefully. This will have a financial impact on what we want to do in the coming years, which I believe so many members of this Assembly support and want to see happen for young people, for families, for those being educated and trained, for businesses that want to take on apprentices, that want to see training, that want the support that they... we've had it before, we've had this debate previously, and we're getting somewhere. So I'm sure we'll talk about in detail those areas later, although there won't be a debate on it. But so I think we have to really think this through before we vote on this. Please don't take the simplistic approach. The shiny thing that you're being offered won't be as shiny when the lustre wears off and we're left with the aftermath and the impact of that long term for our economy, for the people in Jersey, and in 2026 when they will have absolute effects which we don't want to see. So I urge members to reject this proposition.
Thank you, Deputy. Minister.
Sorry, sir. Thank you, sir. Sir, members, if approved, this proposal would lead to a significant funding gap, as Deputy Ward has just mentioned, which will worsen operating deficits in 2025 and lead to an overdrawn consolidated fund. The loss in income is so significant that, if approved, the Council of Ministers would be forced to take alternative action to bolster our finances. The Deputy mentions his time as Treasury Minister in his amendment, and indeed he also mentioned it during his speech. And I find it difficult to believe that during his tenure as Minister, he would have asked the Assembly to support the kind of unfunded reduction in income that he proposes now. I'm sure Deputy Mezek will speak more about the impacts his proposal may have on the housing market, but I have to stress that this proposal would not create new market activity. Stamp duty holidays bring forward transactions as buyers rush to take advantage of the holiday. In turn, all this does is drive up prices. In fact, prices are likely to increase beyond the stamp duty saving, leaving people paying more during the holiday than they would today. This is what was seen in the UK when the UK introduced its stamp duty holiday. The Council of Ministers are aware that many islanders and businesses are concerned with the low turnover in the housing market. However, this proposal would not address the fundamental issues that have caused this. Jersey's housing market has seen years of unsustainable price growth above real earnings, making properties unaffordable for many islanders. This is beginning to adjust, and prices are decreasing for the first time since 2003, which is something we all wanted to see. Intervening in the market, which would be in direct contradiction of FPP advice, will only prolong this adjustment by creating a boom then bust phenomenon. Housing activity is ultimately driven by affordability. A £5,000 reduction in stamp duty for a £350,000 property will make very little difference to someone who is unable to afford a mortgage with a 6% interest rate. The Bank of England's base rate is coming down, and this will be the single most important factor in allowing the housing market to continue to recover from the lows of 2023. I would like to touch briefly on the details of the Deputy's proposal. The largest tax reduction here will go to those buying a £1 million property. First-time buyers, on the other hand, who already receive a stamp duty reduction, will see the smallest benefit. So the Deputy said during his speech that we will not see an abundance of activity come January. I disagree. I started my legal career doing domestic conveyancing, and if we agree to this today, I would be astonished if property lawyers acting for buyers aren't saying to them, well, of course, if you delayed your transaction till January, you will not pay stamp duty, which means that there will be nothing affected by this proposition going through court for the next month. The property court will be dead for the whole of December. And then come January, there'll be a rush while all those people who would have completed between now and the end of the year complete their transactions. And I can tell you how that conversation is likely to go. The lawyer says to their client, the buyer, if you defer till January, you will make a stamp duty saving. Buyer says, yes, that's a marvellous idea, let's do that. The lawyer then contacts a seller's lawyer who says, but my client really wants to sell. My client's going to be disadvantaged by this delay. Perhaps you could give me some of the stamp duty saving. So the seller will get more money, the buyer will still pay slightly less by not paying stamp duty, and the revenue gets nothing. And the courts have nothing to do over December and Friday afternoon, sir. Perhaps. I think that is an entirely likely scenario. So we will then see a slump in 2026 because everybody will accelerate the transactions in the latter half of 2025 to get them in during the stamp duty holiday. This is not a long-term solution. So this is generally not a position that the Council of Ministers are willing to support. Tax reductions for the more expensive properties in Jersey, while it still becomes harder for first-time buyers to get a foot on the housing market due to the price increases that this proposal will likely cause. This proposal would also give a tax break on the purchase of the property, but not on the registration of the mortgage. This is exactly the kind of unintended consequence that proper consideration and consultation allows us to avoid. By circumventing that and asking the Assembly to approve a poorly considered and expensive proposal, the Deputy is asking members to knowingly create distortions in the stamp duty law and its operation. Sir, I urge members to reject this amendment and allow the market to continue to recover without unnecessary intervention. Thank you.
Minister. Deputy Gardner.
Thank you. My speech will be very short. It's mainly to seek views from the ministers who didn't speak yet, and also to seek some views from the proposer to make my decision on the specific amendment. What I hear, and this is important, that proposer in his closing speech will address the 10.5 million of the reduction in the budget and how it can be addressed. What I would like to understand more from the ministers who are rejecting, and this is where I'm finding myself. There are two amendments around stamp duty. One amendment on the primary family property under 700, which is low-cost property for the families who would like downsize, right size, move market around. And the other amendment is for the second. So what we're debating, from my understanding now, it's the primary home for the families or for individuals. We all know that the prices are not dropping. The prices are there. The interest rates are high. And we know that market is stalled. I know there is some belief that market will move, but we didn't see market moving for the last 6-8 months. And we know that the transactions are low and the stamp duty is lower than we expected. I looked at the UK, and it's absolutely, it was a stimulated housing demand and transaction raised during the tax stamp duty holiday in 2021. But I know that it's raised, the market is fluctual, the market is moving. Now, what I really need to understand, and this is why I'm finding myself, I understand why not. I've heard Deputy Ward and I heard the Minister. Why not to do this is what might not work. What I didn't hear, and this is what I would invite to hear, I would invite to share, what are the actions that Council of Ministers proposing to make market to move, to people to be able to sell and to buy up to 700. I'm not saying what is right, what is wrong, but this is at least solution. It might be not ideal solution. We have it for a year. It might not work. It might work. I don't know. But what I heard lots of why not. I would like to hear, this is what we are doing to ensure that up to 700,000 flats will be moving, the market will work, and people will be able to buy. If I'll hear, what's important for me to hear what we will do, not general traffic, specific concrete step, because this is very specific. I can understand it might work, I hope it will work, I don't know. I need alternative to be offered to me. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy. Does any other member speak on this amendment? Yes, Deputy Minister.
Thank you, sir. I took a note of when Deputy Ozef said this, but he asked us to debate this amendment on its merits. And so I think we should oblige him by making it a short debate, because I'm afraid to say I don't think this proposal does have merits. So it's a fact that economists are not keen on stamp duty as a tax. They frequently commentate saying that it's not an effective or equitable lever to affect the market, and I think there's a lot in that. And when you adjust stamp duty or you experiment with new tools within it to try to influence behaviour, it can distort markets and have unintended consequences. It can artificially spike activity, leading to increased prices. Evidence from the UK's stamp duty holiday shows this. It can disproportionately benefit sellers rather than buyers, because the sellers are able to maintain prices where they are rather than reduce them, which is what the market would otherwise dictate. And so, with what Deputy Joseph is proposing in particular, it essentially abolishes the advantages for first-time buyers that we already have built into this, because it puts non-first-time buyers on the same rules and same rates as them, taking away their advantage at a time where we would want to be encouraging them. So you cannot blame any individual or business, in fact, for looking at a proposal like this and finding it attractive. If you were looking to buy a property and you were factoring all of the different costs that you're going to have to pay in order to buy that property, stamp duty will be one of the factors you'll be considering. And if you were to say to that person, there's a proposal to take that stamp duty cost off you, of course you're going to find that perspective attractive. So if you're a business trying to help clients sell properties and you're struggling, and you hear that there's a proposal that says prospective buyers won't have to pay stamp duty, so you'll be able to argue more easily for your clients to be able to sell their homes, rather than give them the uncomfortable advice of saying if they lower their prices further, they might find it more easy to find a buyer. Of course, you're going to find that an attractive prospect. But so when individuals look at these things, they are doing it through a myopic lens, a lens of their own experience and not the macroeconomic picture. It is our job as a government to pay greater attention to the bigger picture, to the macroeconomics of this, and understand that whilst a policy proposal from an individual perspective may look good, from everybody's combined experience may actually have negative consequences. And the one that is so easy to predict from this is to disrupt what we can see with the data in front of us that is happening right now, which is a market correction. If members look at the previous house price index to see the trend of house prices in recent years, they can see a rather steady trend that all of a sudden bubbles in 2021. And prices spike at a much greater rate than they had previously. That coincides with post-pandemic and disastrous Liz Truss budget. And we can see more recently that it's starting to go back down again. In fact, it's heading to where if you were to take that chart with a ruler and draw a straight line, you'd find where we would have been anyway. So throwing into the mix, this stamp duty proposal will completely disrupt that journey. It will be an incentive for people who are looking to sell properties not to offer them at prices that are actually realistic in this time, because a property will sell if you pitch it at the right price, and it's an uncomfortable thing to do, to find that you're struggling to sell something because buyers, the price you're offering is not matching the expectation of buyers. It's uncomfortable, and there's going to be a lag between the expectation of the seller versus the expectation of a buyer. But right now we see a correction going on, which I think represents a green shoot and represents something that I think offers far greater hope to Jersey's young people than a completely uncosted temporary tax break, which all the evidence shows will lead to higher house prices and will abolish the advantages that those young people may have as first-time buyers, and which will disproportionately benefit the sellers. It's not a good case to be making to them. And of course, I completely agree with what Deputy Ward said about the irresponsible tactic of proposing something that sees a loss in revenue, projected revenue, of £10.5 million without being able to tell us where a single penny of it is coming from. So Deputy Joseph spoke about the reduction in transactions, meaning that the government is making less in stamp duty anyway. Well, of course, that's true, But part of the reason that we've had those lower transactions has been high inflation affecting people's ability to budget and spend, and interest rates. So the silver lining to high interest rates and higher inflation is that we get a greater tax take from other areas. Inflation means we get more in GST. Interest rates means we get more from finance industry payments. So I'm not saying that that's a good thing, but it's a fact that with stamp duty receipts down in this time, they had been more than made up for by increased tax receipts in another area. But we see inflation going down and interest rates going down now. And at the same time, he wants to remove the revenue we would get from stamp duty. So I regard that as fiscally imprudent and irresponsible. And as the Treasury Minister has outlined, even if it's something we might just be able to stomach next year, it would have greater consequences in the long term, disrupting our ability to invest in the public services that we desperately need to invest in if we're to provide the decent quality of life that islanders expect, and in particular, young people. Deputy Ward spoke about the work that he's doing to make childcare more affordable. Expensive childcare makes it harder for people to get on the housing ladder, or harder to get a bigger house, because it's a huge expense to them that they can't avoid. Helping them with that will make it easier for them to find themselves in the best housing that they can afford for themselves. Providing more investment into the First Step scheme, a responsible way of trying to provoke transactions and increase demand, doing it with the price limitations that are already set within that scheme and focusing that funding at those who will most benefit from it, and hopefully unlock chains further up as well, is a much better targeted measure to try to boost activity in the market than a blanket tax cut, which all of the economic evidence we can see when it's been attempted in other jurisdictions shows that it has unintended consequences, and at a time in market correction will disrupt that to the benefit of very few people, to the benefit disproportionately to sellers, and for the disbenefit potentially of those seeking to buy, whose prices will perhaps counterintuitively go up, and the loss of revenue that government needs to invest in the services to make our island an even better place to live. On those bases, sir, I urge members to oppose this proposition, this amendment.
Thank you, Deputy. Does any other member speak on this amendment? Conor St John.
Thank you, sir. So, in the last 12 months, I've been a fairly frequent visitor to the Royal Court on a Friday afternoon. And in recent months, I've witnessed growth in the numbers of people making transactions. That's just not my visual interpretation, sir. I understand that transactions have grown by 19% in Q3 versus Q2. So we are seeing uplift. So on the bus this morning, I spoke to someone about properties that have been on the market for some time. I was pleased to hear that one of the properties is now under offer. Under offer at a significantly lower price than it had been on the market for. But that property, sir, in my opinion, is still vastly overpriced. So the issue is with the price of the properties. I think this amendment is well intentioned, sir, but I think it's going to be lower interest rates that will see the market change. So we've heard about the benefits to sellers. If this comes into place, then people will be able to ask more for their properties. So the reason I've been a regular visitor to the court is that we've been trying to sell 16 homes, and it took some 12 months for those homes to be sold. They were shared equity, sir, and the price of those properties, the developer did not drop £1, sir. I've seen families in tears in my office who can't afford those properties, sir. But the developer knew that people would come along and pay that. And the real challenge for those people and those families was meeting the bank's requirements when they were getting tested at 8 and 11% interest rates, sir. So I think the amendment is well intentioned, sir, but I'm not able to support it. Thank you.
Thank you, Conor. Conor St Brillard.
Thank you. Just a brief word, and once again, in terms of the previous speaker, at the parish halls, we do see a flow of property transactions coming through, and I can't say that
it has fallen off in recent times. I'm also aware of the, I think we could call it an oversupply of one-bedroom flats at the moment, and I don't think there's any demand for those. I think the base problem is there's not so much a housing crisis as an expectation crisis, and that's on both sides. The high expectations from vendors who are unprepared to budge, and the high expectations from purchasers who wish to have a property at a lower price. How the market is going to accommodate that remains to be seen, but that's my view is that is more of a problem and is probably unlikely to be answered by the Deputy's proposals. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Colin. Does any other wish to speak on the proposition? Deputy Andrews.
Thank you, sir. I think it has been a very interesting debate so far, and we have heard Deputy Joseph give a very good speech and argue why he believes that the proposal is necessary. And we've also heard a few very good speeches from members who've been antithetical about this amendment that has been lodged to the government budget. I think it is very clear, hearing from some members, that they are concerned if stamp duty is to be removed. Stamp duty does act as a demand-side constraint. So if we look at, for instance, a first-time buyer, there is a first-time buyer threshold, which currently stands at about £700,000. And anybody else who owns property already would be given an opportunity to transact in the market, and of course they would not be subject to stamp duty, whereas before they would. Now, I think it is quite clear as we look at Jersey's housing market, it has gone through a bit of a turbulent period. Transactions were dropping, and pretty substantial the drop was. But now we have seen the market start to pick up very slowly. The number of transactions are increasing. And really, that has been down to numerous factors. When we look at, say, the Monetary Policy Committee, they have about 8 meetings per annum, and they are the ones who decide on what the base rate should be. Listening to the experts, they seem to be of opinion that the base rate will be dropping each time the Monetary Policy Committee meet by about 0.25 percentage points. So currently it stands at about 4.75%. And this can have implications when we look at levels of high borrowing, because the Bank of England will be charging commercial banks on their reserves, but also if commercial banks are looking to borrow, the rates will be obviously higher. And of course that then has a cascade effect for people who are then looking to obtain borrowing. And that's not just households, that may also be firms as well. So as we see the increase in rates of borrowing, aggregate debt is likely to reduce, and we've seen that with the Statistics Jersey reports that have been published. And of course, there has been a decrease in the number of transactions. So I think the purpose of the amendment is to try and stimulate a bit more activity in the housing market, to increase the number of transactions, because I know some people, for instance, have tried to sell their property and they have had no luck because people do not want to buy. The case may be if you are a cash buyer, it doesn't matter too much, but if you are somebody who has no choice but to borrow, the borrowing will be very expensive, and you're probably better off putting on hold a transaction that you would like to make until some point in maybe the 3rd or 4th quarter of next year, when credit is cheaper for you and it's probably more affordable. Whereas if you commit yourself now, then your debt obligations will be more expensive. So I can see why many households are very hesitant. And so what this potentially can do, because there is less demand in the market, potentially we could then see house prices start to drop. For some people, they are already experiencing negative equity, where basically the mortgage that is outstanding is of a higher value compared to what the property is worth if it was to be valued by a professional estate agent. And so I think there are certain households who, of course, remain very concerned about that. And what they really want to see is the government to take action. And I think that would probably be in the form of intervention, in the form of prospective policies. And so I can understand why Deputy Joseph is doing this, because there potentially could be implications where you've maybe got couples who are living together, they're going through the process of divorce, and they've got no choice but to live in the same property, and they cannot discharge the property because nobody wants to acquire the property. And so then what you end up with is a scenario where potentially people have no choice but to drop house prices. Now, for some people, they would be saying, well, that is good if we see a drop in house prices. But we've also got to understand there will be some people who, of course, are experiencing negative equity. And, of course, banks, credit lenders, they will be very concerned if they see a structural collapse in the housing market where we see house prices decrease. And the ability to then lend could be impacted upon, depending on the severity of the structural collapse within the housing market. And so it could, in very extensive circumstances, become very difficult to obtain borrowing because the banks don't want to lend if an asset is continually going to be depreciated. So there is further implications in that respect. Now, I don't think that is going to be the case because, as I say, I think housing transactions are picking up. It's a gradual increase. It's going to take time for the housing market to bounce back, but that will happen once the base rate starts to decrease. Commercial banks will then offer credit lending services that will be easier for people to access cheaper credit. And so that will incentivize investment. It will incentivize demand once again in the housing market. So we will start to see the housing market begin to stabilize at some point in the future. So I just wanted to add that because I thought that wasn't part of what had already been discussed, and I thought I'd just contribute and add something new to the debate. So thank you, sir.
Thank you, Deputy. Deputy Coles.
Thank you, sir. I rise now. I heard earlier people were making declarations about whether they were intending to sell property and would be benefiting from this. But I'm on the flip side. I recently, well, this year, was successful in purchasing a house. And this was a step up, as I had bought a one-bedroom flat before. And so I want to address whether or not stamp duty actually came into our considerations. I mean, yes, because we are aware that stamp duty was going to be something that we'd have to pay as we took that step up. The property that we bought would have fallen within this £700,000 holiday. But do you know what? It was considered as part of our step up. I had realised that my original one-bedroom flat that I purchased over 10 years ago had appreciated in value. Deputy Mezek made reference earlier in his speech about the COVID bubble that we hit afterwards. And actually at one point when we were looking at that same post-COVID time, that we were having valuations of our property at in excess of £400,000, which I said was ludicrous considering, like I said, about 8 years prior, I bought it for less than £200,000. Waited until, like I say, 2020, end of 2023 to put our house on the market, had a more of a realistic and acceptable valuation. The person who purchased our property came and negotiated that price, which we all factored in, because it is all part of the factoring in when you take that step up. You have to balance whether you can afford to pay the loan repayments. That was the biggest thing we had to take into consideration. And as we've said, the interest rates at the moment are at a two-decade high, though they have started to decline, and we're seeing that continued decline. And I think once the base rate of interest has come down from the 6% that it sits at the moment to something that people can more realistically afford, that will be the key factor in our property market. So though I believe this amendment is well intentioned, I believe the 10 million plus unaccounted for, that is the biggest worry and concern that I have around this amendment, sir. And so, sir, I would urge members to reject this, as £10 million is a lot of money for us to do without.
you, Deputy. Deputy Renner.
Thank you, sir. I'm going to start off in support of the government. It's nice to start in that position. Most of the points I wanted to make have actually already been made, so it's going to be a very short speech. But in a way, it also relates to the next speech, because I think some of the next amendment, rather, because some of these arguments build on each other, I think. The Deputy says that the aim of the measure is the proposed measure is, quote, designed to stimulate housing market activity, address persistent affordability challenges and mitigate the negative impacts of historically low transaction volumes. My argument, with the greatest respect to Deputy Joseph, is the category error here is to see the current housing market as a problem that needs correction rather than a stage in a necessary process of adjustment. I think house prices, when you look at the charts, began to detach from earnings around 7 or 8 years ago. In other words, the gap between the housing affordability gap really began to increase dramatically 7 or 8 years ago, 6 or 7 years ago. It's different for some different categories of house. In fact, they began to detach, you could argue, from reality. It was a huge rise, and I would argue we are still going through the necessary correction. House prices still need to get closer to earnings. I don't think a significant factor in stopping transactions, a significant factor in stopping transactions is that sellers have not yet all adjusted their prices to the market. We've heard several people make reference to people unable to sell. It depends on circumstances, of course, but the hard truth is you can always sell a house or property. You just have to lower the price. Now, that may cause stress to individuals and so on, in which case they may not choose not to sell at that point. But it is not the case that sellers cannot sell if they really need to sell. We are still going through that correction. And that adjustment in people's expectations, which is the key thing here, that adjustment to those expectations does seem to be happening. Transactions are beginning to rise. This is a very common fact when the market slows down in the housing market, that there is a stickiness. There's a stickiness while people hold on, keep their prices up, the selling price up, in the hope that the market will recover quickly and they will still meet their original expectation. But the situation we've gone through is one where the house prices rose so dramatically that we cannot sustain those house prices. We do not want to sustain those house prices at that level, and the prices still need to fall a little bit, and it is happening. So stamp duty was no deterrent to market activity when the market was at its peak, and there's no reason to believe, as the Treasury Minister and Housing Minister have said, that a cut in stamp duty now would be the significant fact that would stimulate a significant permanent upturn in the market. So I don't think that persistent affordability challenges are addressed by this amendment. It will at best bring transactions forward. Prices will mostly rise to compensate for the cut in stamp duty. The seller gains, not the buyer. So overall, I'm afraid this amendment does not make sense to me.
Thank you, Deputy. Does any other member speak on this amendment? Deputy Ward.
Thank you, sir. Again, a very interesting debate, and I think the thing which keeps coming into my mind is about timing. We are seeing, we've heard members talk about increased transactions quietly coming through. We've seen interest rates which were coming down, now apparently not coming down so quickly. But on the positive side, on interest rates, as the Treasury Minister will well know, that's an incredible positive sign for the profits of financial institutions, which will benefit our island economy. So when we talk about timing and we want to stimulate a part of the market, is the timing right in 2025 for us? Is this the moment where we do make an effort and be positive about how we get things moving again in our economy? So I have empathy with Deputy Joseph in that respect. I'm really concerned when we're kind of denying what's happened in history. We've seen some extraordinary low, historic low interest rates. We've seen historically high inflation rates. We've seen some extraordinary economic conditions, which I've never seen in my lifetime. I'm sure most of the Assembly members have ever seen. And what that has caused is caused a huge disruption in the market. Is this the moment in time where we now go, okay, we recognise all of that's gone down the path, we now need to try and do something different and stimulate the economy? I'm really concerned about all the shroud waving. I think the £10 million scheme, and I know when I was housing minister and we were setting this up, our biggest concern was that actually we were going to potentially inflate the market. But actually what we appreciated was that such a tiny drop in the large housing ocean that it wasn't going to have an inflationary impact, which is, I think, proven to be the case. The market, I'm also concerned when the Treasury Minister talks about, we talk about this £10 million gap. Well, actually, if you've no transactions, I think nothing is nothing is a word term that comes to mind. So I am concerned that actually, where is that figure, this gap? Are we actually, by reducing transactions and not allowing the market to function, actually being foisted by our own petard, in other words, shooting ourselves in the foot? So I wonder if we do need to get that. So my thoughts are, let's get this market moving again. There's lots of opinion. I'm not sure a conversation on a bus is actually that helpful when it comes to making big decisions like this. I'd like to see more hardcore evidence. All I do know is we're seeing building companies collapse. That is hard evidence. People losing their job in the construction industry. We need to stimulate our economy. The bottom line is who's going to pay for all of the good things that we want to do in this assembly? It's actually going to be the private sector, activity in the private sector, our economy being strong. That's what's going to pay the bills that we want to see our most vulnerable in our society covered off. So, as I said, I think there's a lot of this is about timing. I appreciate the idea that this could be this is a short, and I appreciate Deputy Joseph's commentary around saying that we can do this over a short period of time and then review what the situation is and then change as we go forward. We have that within our gift. But the other point is what is government doing to stimulate the market, to help things move? I don't see anything. I've heard a lot of shroud waving, but I haven't heard any real positive message from government that says we are going to make this economy move. Therefore, please don't worry about the housing market, which is such significant concern to so many people. So I will be supporting Deputy Joseph on balance. I think it's a bold move, and I think the timing is right.
Thank you, Deputy. Does any other member speak on this amendment? I call upon Deputy Joseph to reply. Deputy Joseph.
Sir, well, firstly, sir, this issue about transactions and revenue loss. I begin by addressing my concern that there is a estimated loss of 10.5 million, and from this proposal, let me be absolutely clear again with members. This figure is based upon the assumptions made in May 2024, the comments about the green shoots of the market. The third quarter market is not in any way indicative of the green shoots when one knows that the majority of the transactions were the subsidised housing projects. And I'm afraid, sir, after the amount of people that I have spoken on the doorstep, and then the level of support that has been advanced to this proposition. And if members want to say, and agree with Deputy Mezek, that this is just about rentiers, this is just about vested interests, then fine. But, I mean, are we really saying that the signatories to that letter, which were members of the people who provide the building materials, the landlord, the wicked landlords and the estate agents, do we really say that their views and their very strong views to do a letter of support in relation to something that's urgently needed is just vested interests? I am not here for any vested interests apart from the vested interests of ordinary working people who I know are stuck. And there's nothing else in this budget, I would say to the council ministers. I asked on the very first day that I heard about this budget, after I returned, I said, what is in this budget that's going to give any confidence of building in terms of supply? How many houses are going to be built as a result of this budget? I wish I wasn't here actually having to present such a short-term stimulus. But I know I've got to do something, and I know that the members of my parish that are in this situation, in this dreadful situation, where they cannot transact, I know that this will make a real difference. And if members want to vote against it, that's fine. I accept the democratic view of the Assembly. But however, let there be no doubt of the people that will be genuinely upset. I haven't gone to go and stoke up a massive hoo-la-la about the people that are suffering, because they're suffering in silence. You just have to see the amount of for sale signs. And this issue about this revenue. I've been the Treasury Minister, sir, and the Treasury Minister, I just need to respectfully say, I don't need to be reminded of the importance of fiscal responsibility. The fact that she is in this difficult position with a market, with a budget that has such a short amount of money in it, in the consolidated fund, that £10 million either way is going to be catastrophic, just indicates maybe that actually she's got an even more difficult situation to deal with than she's actually meaning. But thank goodness she's got the Pillar 2 tax revenue coming in as a result of the financial services industry. Thank goodness that saved us. And confidence is the name of the game. The current reality is that transactions are continuing to be very low. I'm sorry, but these anecdotal comments on a bus or appearing in the Royal Court are not borne out by the evidence. The evidence is absolutely clear. And the shroud waving, well, we used to hear about shroud waving. Stamp duty holiday that's going to merely delay transactions until January. Well, I have to say to the Minister, there's not many transactions actually tabled going forward. They're about a third of what they were in a normal market condition. So if it's a third, I say to the Minister, that's the least of her problems, because the problems are going to come next year when it has been accepted that interest rates are rising. So what does one do? We don't set interest rates here. The Treasury Financial Services Minister, I jolly well hope, is going to do something to deal with this issue that Jersey mortgages are at fully 100 basis points higher than that of the United Kingdom, when all the advice I have served this Assembly from financial services indicate that, if anything, that with the abundance of cash in our financial institutions, we should be actually having the mortgage rates which are at least as low, or at least at the level of the United Kingdom. But there again doesn't seem to be some particular action being taken to that. If I was the Financial Services Minister, I'd be ringing up the banks and saying, change your rates. Otherwise, there's going to be some regulatory issues, or we're going to investigate you for market abuses. The fact is that this island is a proud island of cash in deposits, and that should be translated through to mortgages that are widely and plentifully available. And I welcome, by the way, the announcement of a bank, a new lender in the market, which is showing confidence and actually lending. But there's no doubt at all, of course, that lending criteria have been stressed. And the comment that was made about the decision to stress test mortgage lenders, we do not regulate mortgage lending in Jersey, unlike in other places. We don't regulate it at all. And so the fact that this bubble that occurred was a result of, in large measure, not only because of one bank lifting the multiple of income from, I think, 6 to 9. That was one of the one of the inflationary increases in the housing market. But that's gone. Banks are not doing that anymore, and the new bank that's arriving, providing access to, is also not doing that. The housing crisis demands action. As I say, this budget offers nothing to address this crisis or stimulate activity. It does nothing to deal with the struggle to access and get onto the ladder, to get out of the home that you're in and downsize. We cannot solve every housing issue with one amendment, but we can do something decisive. And I say to the Treasury Minister, it is not 10.5 million. And in any case, even if it is, then I didn't hear a word of contradiction about the increased income that we're going to get as a result of those interest rates that are higher. Interest rates higher means banking profits are higher, which means taxes go up. The tax revenue goes up. I didn't hear a word from ministers about that. This, sir, is also an amendment which is designed to give confidence to not only the housing market and those people that I have met on the doorstep who are stuck, and there's no prospect of them not getting stuck, because if you start at the bottom, it doesn't move upwards, and it's those people at the lower end that are most affected. And yes, we have first-time buyer reliefs, but it's those people that are not of great means, that are not first-time buyers, that are basically wanting to get an apartment or a modestly priced home. They're the ones that are being stuck because at the higher end of the market, it's not moving. And yes, there's an adjustment of prices. But are we sending out a message to the island that actually, no, we're not going to do anything until house prices have fallen back further? Well, one can criticise politicians and what they say, but there's one thing that matters in politics, and that it's the economy, stupid, said a certain member of an election in the United States or somewhere else, and it's been very clear that it's the economy that matters. We have a Labour Party in the United Kingdom, which is not a favourite party of the housing minister, and he's on record of saying it, that is actually trying to do some building. They're putting private sector investment. They're trying to get an investment conference. Where is the investment? Where is the investment and the confidence that people are actually going to make if they think they can make a decision like that young man that I saw, whose father and son did a refurbishment of a block, of a 3-unit apartment, I think, in St Helier, who can't sell it? Where is the confidence of people going to be doing more of that? There's been not one comment made in this debate about all of the other sectors that are affected by a housing market that is not transacting. There is a thin order book. How many more construction firms are we going to see collapse? There's nothing in the order books for them. Those are the big firms, but what about all the subcontractors that are affected? I say again, the importance of confidence. And this is a confidence. This isn't a reckless measure designed to blow a hole in the Treasury Minister's budget. I would never do such a thing. I'm interested in actually medium to long-term revenues. I want the Treasury Minister to be here in a year's time that is going to have the kind of stamp duty revenue back at those same rates to pay for those public services. That's what I'm wanting. I don't know, Treasury Minister, if she wants, I'll give way if she wants to say something. This is a targeted, temporary and timely measure. It is not a blanket policy or long-term intervention. It is targeted to those that need the relief most. Up to 1.2 million property sales. After that, you get nothing. This is not for buy-to-let purchases. It is temporary. It is lasting for 1 year. It will ensure that the impact is sharp and focused, and it is timely. I'd have liked, actually, like the old days, but I couldn't do it, for it to come in if members was to approve it overnight. But that's not possible according to the way that things work these days. I am worried about those islanders that are listening to this debate, that were really hoping for action and not excuses. They want to see this Assembly address the real struggles the silent struggles that many islanders are facing. We all came in here, sir, with a housing crisis. And what have we got to say to them about what we're doing? What, we're just waiting till a market correction until Deputy Mezek is happy with the price level of housing plunging? I mean, really? Is this really what the middle ground of states members who are not on the political left really think? I don't think so. I appeal to members within the middle ground, within those sensible middle ground, those parishes that have people that are genuinely struggling. And is this inflationary? Well, the evidence is that when there is a supply problem, that you will basically create if you have a fewer number of things on the market that is needed, you will create inflation. I would like this budget amendment to be accompanied. We didn't hear anything from the planning minister. We didn't hear anything from the housing minister about supply. This amendment is in the context of an attempt to do something. The Bridging Island plan, debated before this Assembly took office, has got rezoned sites in it. Not one rezoned site has got a piece of earth moved to start. Not one. There's one that's got planning permission. There may be the one in St John, but there's a rezone.
Where to give way?
I'll give way, yes.
So, point of clarification, I'm not sure the last time the deputy drove past field J1109, sir, but you can clearly see activity in that field today, sir.
I respond and say, sir, that is a very, very good housing project, but it is a parish-based project, and it is relatively small compared to the rest of the big sites that were basically passed by this Assembly. There is the constable will know, sir, that this Assembly failed in the Bridging Island plan to put anything like the amount of supply of homes into the market. And it's a serious issue which this Assembly has failed. And we haven't heard one...
Deputy, are we getting away from the amendment a little bit now?
Yeah, well, we're getting away from... This is about creating confidence, sir. This is about creating a confidence in basically that this Assembly is going to take seriously the need for private investment, for transactions to be, in terms of volume, setting a new market level. It is not inflationary because of the bank lending criteria. Evidence from the UK that this was an inflationary thing is not correct and not borne out. And I'm not going to quote from all of the people that are needed to say this. The reality is that transactions are at a very low level. They continue to be at a low level, and this is designed to do something about it. This is not about delaying cliff edges, because it doesn't deal with that. It's targeted, it's immediate, and the proposal is not inflationary. In a slow market like ours, buyers have negotiating power, sellers are not in a position to inflate prices significantly because of the issue of mortgage interest. I'll repeat that. In a slow market where buyers have a negotiating power, sellers are not in a position to inflate prices significantly. What they need is actually transactions to happen from the bottom up. The savings from this stamp duty holiday will directly go to buyers, well, helping them meet their deposits, reducing borrowing and making home ownership a reality will not line the pockets of sellers. So that argument is, I'm afraid, incorrect. This budget offers, as I say, nothing about dealing with a stimulating of supply. Islanders continue to struggle to access homes to purchase, and this Assembly had, from the beginning of its term of office, a duty to act. We cannot solve every housing issue with one amendment, but we can do something, and we can do this. And this has a proven track record endorsed by economists that know what they are talking about. And as for the FPP report on housing, well, it had no recommendations. The FPP's report on housing by the eminent economists that we have was asked not to write recommendations. And I leave that with members because it's true. A buyer who saves on stamp duty reinvests money locally. It invests it in renovations, in furniture, in essential services. Tradespeople, small businesses, local suppliers, these create a ripple effect of economic activity that helps everybody, not just homeowners. And at the moment, if members members I know talk to ordinary people, do they not realise, do they not agree with me that the economy is in stagnation and there are many, many worried individuals about both in the trades business and all the other related sectors? This is targeted. I've already said that. Temporary, it's timely, and it's a message of accountability and action of states members. I close by saying I ask members to take what is, to not be concerned. I'm a former Treasury Minister. I know about fiscal responsibility. I would not propose something that was fiscally irresponsible. It is fiscally irresponsible that we are in such a tight, consolidated position. But we'll come back to that later on in the debate. It is not realistic to say that there is a £10.5 billion cost. I've explained that because of the other economic development, other things. I don't have a large department to assist me, but isn't it obvious to members that a transacting market of housing is going to stimulate all sorts of economic activity throughout the island, which is not happening? I urge members to reject I've well been used to the shroud raving that has been raised sometimes on both sides of this. This is a serious amendment that had a serious amount of research carried out on it and is in the line with the internationally accepted measures that you take when you have a market that is not transacting. And it is the only thing that is going to do anything to give this message from this budget that actually this Assembly wants the housing market to move, the housing market to have confidence. And I leave members with that and ask them, when they meet over Christmas and they talk to their parishioners and they say, why did you vote in favour or against this? Ask them what it will look like in 3 or 4 months' time when we continue to see stagnation and all the ripple effects that go on. Members are denying the reality if they're saying there isn't a problem. There is a problem, and this will fix it in a responsible, targeted, timely and fiscally responsible way that will improve the revenues of the Treasury Minister in other ways, and most importantly, will get the housing market transacting so that next year we will have stamp duties back to their normal level. So I move the amendment.
Is the appel called for? The appel has been called for. Members are invited to return to their seats. I ask the greffier to open the vote. If members, including those present remotely, have had the opportunity of casting their votes, then I ask the greffier to close the voting. I can announce that the amendment has been rejected. 7 votes pour, 36 votes contre, and 1 abstention.
Can I have both the fours and against, please, sir?
Yes.
And the abstention, please.
Yes.
Those voting for, the Conotop of St Saviour, Deputies Gardner, Ozef, Balash, War, Wilson, and online Deputy Dublé. Those voting contre, the Conotabs of St Helier, St Brelard, Trinity, St Peter, St Martin, St John, Bruville, St Mary, and Deputies Southern, Tadier, Luce, Morel, La Hegara, Ayer, Ward, Owls, Forst, Farnham, Moore, Mezek, Coles, Porray, Miles, Renouf, Feltham, Jern, Miller, Howell, Ferry, Kovac, Curtis, Ward, Andrews, and online the deputies Labby, Curtis, and Rose Binet.
Was the abstention? Did you read the abstention as well?
Oh, sorry, and the Conotop of St Clement abstained.
I'll move on to the 28th Amendment, removal of stamp duty surcharge on second homes, lodged by Deputy Joseph. Deputy Joseph, there's an amendment by the Council of Ministers. Is that accepted by you or not? I'll ask the greffier to read the 28th Amendment.
Page 2, paragraph A. After the words Article 9(2)A of the law, insert the words, except that in Summary Table 1, the income estimate for stamp duty in 2025 should be reduced by 2 million to reflect the removal of the current higher rate surcharge on the sale of second homes for 1 year. In paragraph O, after the words set out in the appendix to the accompanying report, insert the words, except that on page 30, after the words the previous forecast, there should be inserted the words, in order to promote a positive increase in the sale of residential properties, the additional higher rate of stamp duty in relation to sale and purchase of second homes has been removed for 1 year.
Yes, Deputy Joseph.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. So the surcharge issue is about in my view, the setting aside for, because we always only do things for 1 year, the 3% stamp duty surcharge. I believe it was a measure that was introduced with all good intentions. But as always in politics, there are unintended consequences. And also, when a policy is brought in, which was good at and clearly necessary at a time, and it was the original Corporate Services Scrutiny Panel that proposed this, and that was a time when we were seeing this extraordinary and very damaging increase in housing prices, and that was a massive problem. And so I believe that the original intention was actually good. However, when it was introduced, it was not only increased, but it came just at the time that the property market is in a very difficult situation. The policy was that it was introduced to so-called curb the speculative investment in second homes and to make housing more accessible to local residents. The idea was to discourage buy-to-let investors, and overseas buyers were seen apparently to be driving up property prices. The reality is that this measure has failed to achieve its purpose and has introduced significant distortions in the housing market. Instead of improving affordability, the surcharge has contributed to rising rents and reduced rental stocks. Landlords are facing, and I don't criticise all of these things, are facing higher costs as a result of regulations. They're having to either absorb these costs. I'm not sure whether they can pass them on, but when you have a market, as we've been speaking about previously, that's a contracting amount of private sector rental market properties on the market, what is going to happen to prices? Well, they'll go up. There is fewer rental properties on the market, which means that rents are going higher, and that is leaving many islanders struggling when this place is already got unacceptable costs in terms of rising inflation. The surcharge is also acting as a disincentive for potential movers, particularly those who wish to downsize and relocate, because there's all these unintended consequences. There's all these other related issues that the previous debate attempted to deal with. The housing market is creating a bottleneck because you're not getting anything like the kind of investment. And again, I talk about investment. I was surprised, sir, in a question that I asked of Deputy Mezek about what his intentions were with the private sector rental market. And he said, and I have to believe him because he said it in this assembly, that he said he wished to see that the housing, private sector housing market would be smaller than the social rented market. He did say, and I understand that he wants to see more people buying. But if members are aware, there is, according to the 2021 census, there were over 9,700 private sector renters. And there were 5,271, I think, something of that order, of social renters. Now, if one members think about it, if one's to take the words of Deputy Mezek at face value, that means that we're going to see an extraordinary increase in social rented housing provision, because that's what he says. I have to listen to what he said. And I think that is a further incredibly extraordinary message. I'm not aware that we've actually debated that policy, if it is the government's policy in this assembly. A stagnant housing market reduces activity, as we've already said. And there is an accompanying proposal, I think, that I have maybe touched a nerve, because there's an amendment from the government to reduce the surcharge from 3% to 2%. I don't think that's going to be nearly enough. We'll come to that debate. The fact is the surcharge, as the government is now accepting, is discouraging investment in rental properties. It's perpetuating the shortage of rental homes. It's stopping people from investing. We're here again, I'll repeat again, the importance that the government can't do everything. We can't build a hospital on time. We have to get a private developer to build our office building. Well, you need private capital to do it. You need private capital. And there's private capital that is not in very confident supply, because how many private sector rental units are being created in today? I actually can't think of virtually any. I will repeat that. If members can tell me of any investment in the private sector rental market of any size, then I would be very interested to hear it, because I've been looking and I can't find one. So we're seeing the market being dissuaded, people getting crowded out. We've heard that, that's the government policy. Crowd out the private sector rental market. This surcharge, combined with all of the other maybe necessary approaches, is basically now meaning that we are sending out a message that we are simply not an assembly that accepts people with a variety of needs and a variety of desires as to how they occupy their homes. Renting is a good thing. Renting in the private sector is a good thing. People perhaps buy properties too early because they're expecting that prices are going to inflate. Well, with an assembly that doesn't send out a message on supply, of course they go and buy. And I also must say, and I'm going to be very careful in not commenting on any other matters happening in other places, but there has been some challenges to the surcharge issue, which are within the courts. We need to make sure that we dispel the myth that this is an assembly that does not want to see investment in private sector rental accommodation. We have thousands of islanders who depend upon it in all sectors of society. You have many islanders that are buying properties for their children, for their grandchildren, for their nephews and nieces, and then they let them out. They do it. They do it regularly because they're worried about the future increase in house prices. Well, now they face this incredible, and maybe in the summing up, these debates have happened rather earlier than I was expecting, and I've got some examples that I will use in the summing up of just how much money that the surcharge is actually costing an individual buyer. I heard a radio interview this morning of a 700, I think, £1,000 flat. I'm not sure what it was, but you're talking about tens of thousands of pounds that a private sector investor is having to put in. It means they get no return whatsoever as a result of this surcharge. No return on the investment for 2 years because they're basically paying to pay the stamp duty. Because it's the buyer that basically pays. So you get no return. What message are we sending out to the people that we need to build the homes for renters, which is an important sector? The public can't be, we can't be an island that nationalises and has social rented only provision. You need a variety of tenures. You need people, and we need islanders to be investing in the economy and in the housing stock. And with arguably the controls that are being put in place on rentals, you're going to be able to ensure that rentals are going to be controlled, rental levels are going to be controlled. So we're creating a more difficult situation for the investment market, but what you don't want is you don't want this enormous cost, and it is an enormous cost. It means it's equivalent to if you think of a return on a residential property of being about 3.5% per annum, then effectively you get that alone, no investment. Now, if you've got a choice of whether you put your money in the bank or buy a stock market share, you don't say, oh, well, actually, we're not going to give you any interest on your money for the first year. You get it straight away. We are sending out a signal that we are against the private sector rental market. I understand the previous concerns that people had about the market being overinflated, although the evidence since it seems that there aren't all of these foreign buyers buying. A lot of it was local people buying for their own families and people wanting a better return on their own investments because interest rates were very low. Now we've got nobody wanting to invest in the private sector rental market. If any member in responding to this debate or the Council of Ministers amendment can tell me of where there's an activist investment holding company or there's an investor or friend that's buying anything for rental, I'd like to know, because I haven't heard of a single one. By suspending this for 1 year, we can certainly, again, put confidence, and we can assess in this difficult situation, which is a budget lacking of much else we can offer a message of, again, a confidence and an ability to say to people, yes, please invest in the private sector rental stock, because we need private rental stock, we need social housing stock, and we need first-time buyer homes, and we need family homes on rezoned sites. And it's about solving problems for real people. There are real people in private sector rental accommodation, and they are worried. They are worried that there's going to be a contracting market continuing. There's no new investment going in. They're going to worry about rising rents. Those will happen. No regulator is going to be able to deal with the situation of a rising rent when there's a constrained market. A regulator has to be attuned to the market, as we're seeing with what the JCRA has to do. By supporting this amendment, we can take in full, we can take a practical step towards a well-intentioned policy that was perhaps right at the time, but is no longer fit for purpose. And as John Maynard Keynes, the economist, said, when the facts change, you change your mind. The facts that the Corporate Services Scrutiny Panel of the day were worried about this investment market in properties crowding out local buyers, that is no longer the case. The opposite is the case. There is actually virtually nothing going in terms of private sector rental accommodation. And that is nothing that this Assembly can afford to subsidise and to say that, okay, it's going to be all the social rented landlords and they're going to be the only people living them. It's just not realistic. It's not realistic for the incoming nurses, the doctors, the teachers and other people who do rent property. And they don't have social rented housing needs, they have rental needs. Many of them, because many of them are coming from places that they can't afford to buy houses. And so we need a private rental stock. So in those opening remarks, I know the council are going to try their 2%. I would respond to that in the way, when the time is right and in the absence of anything else, you have to do something. And this surcharge is doing something because the time was wrong to introduce it. History has shown that to be the case, and we have an opportunity to correct that today. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Deputy. Is the amendment seconded? There is an amendment to the amendment lodged by the Council of Ministers, and I ask the greffier to read that amendment to the amendment.
Part 1. Replace the words reduced by 2 million to reflect the removal of the current higher rate surcharge with reduced by 665,000 to reflect the reduction of the current higher rate surcharge from 3 percentage points to 2 percentage points. Part 2. Replace the word removed with reduced.
Yes, Minister.
Thank you, sir. Sir, I'm disappointed that the Deputy chose not to amend the Council of Ministers' amendment to this amendment. The complete suspension of the higher rate of stamp duty for a year is likely to increase demand on investment properties, driving up prices and crowding out first-time buyers. We are, however, mindful that the 3% charge was agreed by the Assembly when the housing market was in a very different position. Since the CSSP, headed at that time by Senator Moore, proposed a higher rate for second properties, interest rates have increased significantly. That said, this is essentially a duty differential which favours first-time buyers over landlords, and we believe that it should remain in place. Ministers are aware that the current conditions are particularly difficult for developers and the construction industry. It is in nobody's best interests for homes to remain empty or construction sites to remain undeveloped, which is the situation we're in at the moment. We are therefore proposing a 1 percentage point decrease in the higher rate of stamp duty for 1 year. Contrary to some assertions, the buy-to-let market continues to transact, accounting for around 10% of property transactions each quarter. This is carefully balanced against owner-occupiers, particularly first-time buyers, who typically compete for the same properties. We cannot allow this type of reduction to allow investors to crowd out these purchasers as part of a demand for property during a 2025 holiday. Our proposal would balance the desire to provide a small amount of support to the market and the private rental sector in particular, without jeopardising the increasing number of transactions by first-time buyers. It also sustains this revenue stream, which, as members can appreciate, is important in this current climate. As stated by myself during the debate on Amendment 25, stamp duty holidays inflate house prices. Jersey's house prices are beginning to adjust after years of unsustainable increases. This must not be jeopardised by house price increases as investors take advantage of the short-term break. We are also aware that the Bank of England base rate is anticipated to continue to fall. A complete removal of the higher rate, coupled with decreased interest rates, may serve to overinflate the market. This smaller reduction will allow for a more measured increase in activity. So I'm sure I'm not alone in remembering very clearly the number of people when we were all canvassing the 2022 elections who talked about their fears that their children could not buy properties in Jersey because buy-to-let landlords were buying up those properties and they were not able to compete. That's one of the reasons why we all voted, certainly why I voted for the surcharge in the first place. I think it has done its job, and we should allow it to continue doing that job and allow young people to compete on a level playing field. We must also remember that the Deputy's amendment would remove £2 million from the Consolidated Fund. This is money that could otherwise be used by the Council of Ministers to continue to support the First Step scheme, which has already allowed dozens of first-time buyers to enter the housing market this year. We urge members to support our amendment to this amendment to provide stable support to the market without removing critical revenue that should be used to support islanders. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Is the amendment seconded?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Does any member wish to speak on the amendment to the amendment? Deputy Iyer.
Thank you, sir.
I have to say that I was rather surprised when I saw that the Council of Ministers had brought an amendment to Deputy Ozoff's amendment, which intends to lower the buy-to-let stamp duty charge from 3% down to 2%. In my eyes, this action will be to the detriment of all those who are seeking to get onto the housing ladder. And indeed, I believe that rather than lowering the rate, we should possibly be increasing it. Our best comparator is the United Kingdom, and their stamp duty land tax rates, which are slightly different to our own form of stamp duty, in that they have three primary brackets. Firstly, 250,000 to 925,000, then up to 1.5 million, and finally over 1.5 million. This simplified version is something that the Treasury should consider adopting rather than our more complex structure. Currently, a purchaser of a residential property will pay 5, 10 and 12% for the corresponding brackets. But if the intention is to buy the property to let, then those rates increase to 10%, 15% and 17%, which equates to 5% surcharge on all such transactions. This means that our corresponding rate of just 3% is not onerous in any way, but conversely may be encouraging those living in the UK to purchase buy-to-let properties in Jersey because of the advantageous rate of stamp duty. And so one has to ask, why are the Council of Ministers trying to lower the rate? In their report, it states that they believe it may bring some stimulus to the market in 2025, and then go on to say that this amendment will reduce the cost of second home ownership, and that we anticipate that this will be supported by continued reductions in the Bank of England's base rate in 2025, as the main factor that it will improve overall affordability to investors. Surely the whole purpose of the surcharge in the first instance is to dissuade people from purchasing too many properties in the buy-to-let market. And indeed, this was mentioned in the original Corporate Services Scrutiny Panel amendment, of which I was a member, to the 2020-2025 government plan, where we stated, the panel has lodged this amendment mindful of the financial gain and wealth associated with buy-to-let property, holiday home and second home purchases, and the contribution it will make to assist with reducing property demand and rebalancing the market towards owner-occupiers and first-time buyers. So this rebalancing is essential to increase home ownership rates in Jersey. We should compare our rate of 54% home ownership with that of Guernsey, which is at above 60%, and that of the United Kingdom, which is above 65%. And it does not compare favourably with the OECD average of over 70% home ownership. This Assembly should be doing everything possible to correct this statistic. And therefore, sir, I ask members to reject the Council of Ministers amendment and additionally to vote against Deputy Ozoff's original amendment. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Deputy. Does any other member wish to speak on the amendment to the amendment? Deputy Andrews.
Thank you, sir. It was during the election that I came forward with a policy to introduce a 3% stamp duty surcharge, and the reason for that was to curb demand in Jersey's housing market because it has compounded our economy. Many people might dispute that claim, however I believe it to be the case. Many islanders are living in rented accommodation. They have dreams, they want to be homeowners, but it's not affordable to be a homeowner. And that is due to the incessant demand that we have seen year on year. And the government has not intervened. The government has not brought forward policies in a timely manner. And by the time the stamp duty surcharge was introduced, it was fair to say that the housing market was distorted. And what we do see now is house prices are beyond many middle-class working families, hard-working families, people who want to stay in Jersey, who want to strive, who want to succeed, But how can they when they are living in rented accommodation? Their rents are excessive. They hardly have anything spare to live on. And that is due to the incessant demand. And of course, we need to look at this. There are many people out there who are investing in buy-to-let properties. And they themselves, they have an implicit rent. They don't pay any rent, and therefore their ability to save is of course increased. So that will only increase demand in the housing market because they have the ability to save to then afford the stamp duty and the stamp duty surcharge. But for the perpetual renter, it is very difficult to afford a property and to also to take into account the amount, the stamp duty of the stamp duty rates that they also are charged as well. And so I do happen to agree with Deputy Ayer, who was absolutely within his right in stating that we should be supporting home ownership. Unfortunately, home ownership stands at around 54% according to the last census. And we are very low in home ownership rates compared to other jurisdictions, which again, Deputy Ayer highlighted. And so all this stamp duty charge reduction will do is it will stimulate investment in second homes in the island. It will make it more difficult for those who aspire to be homeowners. There'll be more people competing. And as we are fully aware, borrowing and the rate of borrowing is going to become cheaper, and therefore we will see demand increase. And that will happen in 2025 when the Monetary Policy Committee take the decisions they have to take to reduce the level of borrowing. And that will only compound our issues that we already have even more. So for me, it is a great concern, sir. And it is absolutely pivotal that I maintain my stance that a 3% stamp duty surcharge is the right thing to maintain. I would even argue that we should be increasing it, just like Scotland, just like Wales, and just like the UK Labour government have, with a 5% stamp duty surcharge rate. Because we've got to be supporting home ownership in this island, and unfortunately that has not happened. There will be consequences, sir, when we have a society of perpetual renters. What will happen in old age? It'll be the government who will have to cover the care responsibilities. There'll be no asset to utilise to then cover such payments. So our issues are going to be very systemic, and I don't see the States Assembly being something that is forward-thinking. It is very much short-termist, and that is something that we have to overcome, and we have to do it very, very soon. So, sir, thank you for allowing me to speak, and I will be voting against the amendment. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Deputy. Does any other member speak on the amendment? Deputy Breniff.
Yes, sir. I shall only speak briefly because I will save my main comments for the final amended or not amended amendment. But I do want to make one point in talking about the amendment to the amendment, because I like Deputy Ayer, I'm slightly surprised that this amendment has been brought forward. It seems to suggest a lack of confidence in the Council of Ministers in their own arguments. They are strongly against stamp duty holidays, but they find themselves in favour of this one. Presumably, I suppose, I wait to hear, but presumably because they think that they may lose if they don't propose this, they may lose on the overall point. My main point is to emphasise a distinction in this argument. The Deputy Joseph says the market is, Deputy Ayer says the market is biased towards investment properties, and he's right. We all have to remember, I think, the anger that propelled many of us, or helped propel many of us into this place. And we remember the stories of people queuing to buy properties, buy new build properties, and when they went on sale, only to find that someone ahead of them in the queue had bought 4 properties. Because the property market in Jersey is a screaming buy for investors. We do not have capital gains tax. We do not have inheritance tax. The market is structurally biased in favour of investment. And the 3% surcharge was not designed to give homeowners a competitive advantage. It was designed to go some way to level the playing field. Not to give them an advantage, but to level the playing field a little bit. And that argument still holds in my mind, and 3% I think is a reasonable rate to hold on that. It's worked. I don't think it's the main reason why we've seen the housing market do what it's done. That's been down to interest rates and so on. But the very fact that the investment sector doesn't like it suggests to me that it is doing its bit, doing its piece. It's not going to stop investors entirely, because it is still, over the medium to long term, property in Jersey represents a very good investment. But the 3% rate we should hold. The risk, if we go to the 2% rate, is that it tells investors that if they go on an investment strike effectively, if they hold off buying, they can come back to this assembly and people can come back to this assembly and say, you know what, this has led to a stagnation in the market. And if they just hold out a little bit longer, then someone will come and propose getting rid of it or lowering it again and lowering it again. I think we should try and hold our nerve on this. Hold our nerve, stick to the 3%. It is working. It does a necessary job to correct the housing market, a structural bias that exists in the housing market. And I urge members to reject the amendment to the amendment. But if they do accept it, like Deputy Iyer, I will also be arguing against that. You'll also be arguing against the amended proposition.
Thank you, Deputy. Deputy Morell.
Thank you, sir. And I think we've had some really interesting speeches, sir, where members quite understandably are trying to seek an understanding of the property market and what has happened to it and where is it going. I think it's really important to go back to the decision of the Council of Ministers to bring in the 3% surcharge for effectively investment properties. I was in the Council of Ministers at the time, and my understanding of it was principally because interest rates at that time were incredibly low. They were at your 0.25% was the Bank of England base rate, and that had been the case for many, many years. Now, it's my opinion that the governments of the day failed to address that 0.25% interest rate, because we've just heard Deputy Renouf talking about the bias from his perspective in the market towards investment properties, and certainly when the interest rates are at 0.25% base rate, there was an enormous bias in the market towards investment properties. And it was my view that very low interest rates was harming people who wanted to get onto the property ladder for their own families, etc. And so, you know, a government finally decided to do something about it. And my understanding of it at that time was effectively that 3% was basically a proxy for interest rates. Interest rates were so low, the government had to bring something in which meant that there was a higher cost to buying investment properties. And the whole point of that was to try to stimulate the personal side of the market where you're buying for your own residential use. And certainly we've seen that that is one of the things that's been happening. That is policy intent that we have seen come to fruition, whereby investment properties have been selling at a much lower rate than they were before, and the hope is and the intention is that on the personal residential side, people are able to buy. But what I would say is, having brought in that 3% surcharge, we do not then move to an automatically binary yes or no perspective. Interest rates have risen since those days. They've risen significantly. Just a few months ago, they were over 5%. Now they have fallen to 4.75%. That's still a healthy interest rate, nowhere near the 0.25% that we had before. And what we are seeing in the market, and this is where the lack of a binary choice comes in, because I heard Deputy Andrews and I heard Deputy Renouf speaking, and what they said makes lots of sense in many, many ways. But this idea that you either have this surcharge or you don't have the surcharge This idea that you can't pick a point where the surcharge is slightly less or slightly more, I think is erroneous. We now have a market in which large developers are not bringing their, having even received planning permission, are not bringing their projects to fruition. I spoke with one developer 3 or 4 months, well, probably actually 2 or 3 months ago, when they received planning permission, on the very day they received planning permission from the planning committee. And I said, when do you think you'll start building? It's an important town, an important urban development. He said, well, not for at least a year or so. I was kind of like, oh, I was disappointed because I wanted them to get their spades in the sand the next day, spades in the ground the next day. Why not? Well, because of interest rates. And of course, also in that is, and because of the 3% surcharge, because there is a role for the investment buyer to play in stimulating the market. And my concern about having this binary yes or no argument is that we ignore the fact that actually it isn't just about you either have investment buyers or you have residential buyers. We need both of them in the market. We need both of them to support each other. If we don't have investment buyers, you don't have developers building those projects. That's what we're seeing. We know those areas in town. Every States member here knows some very, very visible sites which are not being built. And one of the reasons I believe they are not being built is because not only do they have a 4.75% base rate, on top of that, they also have, for those investment buyers, a 3% surcharge. So the costs to be an investment buyer are just beyond the investment analysis. The investment doesn't work in the way that it should do. But what is happening is we are not providing supply anymore because those investment buyers are not there. And that's a real problem. And that's why this is not a binary choice, and why the 2% that is suggested by the Treasury Minister and the Council Ministers, I think does make sense. We're not saying rip it out. We're saying let's bring it down a notch. Let's make that investment equation more workable. So we are trying to stimulate an element of investment. But we're not saying just go for it. We don't want the market to become dominated again by investors only. We want the market to have investors in support of those families that also want to buy for themselves. I think that's really important, and that to me is where a good compromise comes in, and that's what this is with this 2%. It's about trying to stimulate investment in a gentle way, which helps, which then means that those developers can take comfort in that they will have investment buyers, so they then feel they have the confidence. We heard Deputy Joseph quite rightly talk about the importance of confidence in all areas of the economy, but particularly in the housing market. Those developers will then have confidence to actually start work and building out those big developments, which are vital for our island, to house them. So I do worry that if, as an Assembly, we choose not to go down the Council of Ministers route, either we get rid of the 3% surcharge entirely, in which case we do risk the consequences that Deputy Renner talked about of becoming just effectively an investment-only kind of market. That's a very general picture I'm painting there. If we keep it at 3%, we risk keeping those investors out of the market and those developments not being built. That, to me, is why you do have to find that middle path. And that middle path, in this case, is about reducing that surcharge by 1%. We'll see how that works. It is gentle. I don't think you'll see a flood in either direction, but I do think you'll see the market start to correct itself, and hopefully, and the aim is, to encourage those developers at the end of the day to feel the confidence to actually start building those developments for which they've got planning permission. That will be a change in the market that I think all members of this Assembly would want to see. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Deputy. Deputy Alex Curtis.
Thank you, sir. And in some ways, I rise to ask the Assembly whether they think that the positions put across by Deputy Renniff, Deputy Io and Deputy Andrews earlier are the binary choices that Deputy Morell say they were. The arguments put forward when I heard them were not we should have it or we shouldn't. It was, should it be higher, should it be lower, or should we for now stay where we are, which is 3%. And I think the position put across by those members, and perhaps by many here, is that 3% for now is the right figure, and that the debate on the amendment to the amendment is not one of binary, but one of positioning. And so I leave that with members in their mind when they vote on this part. The second part I'd like to touch on is the what one might call open permissions, or those who've put one spade in the ground extant permissions, and the reticence or reluctance of developers to build. And the question I would have here is the 3% difference a real challenge? We've heard from the Treasury Minister quite rightly say, and I'm really pleased actually to hear many members now recognise that the growth in the housing market above inflation was unsustainable, and that a cool-off, a reduction, and one that is sustainably reduced over time is desirable for the wider housing market. But if that's the case, what does stop? What are the concerns when building new property? Take the site that Deputy Morell refers to. Would the developer go ahead if the value of those properties is 3% lower than what the current market average is today? And if they are concerned about the build costs versus a sale cost in a year with a further cooled market, is the stamp duty an issue? And if they are looking, and if we know that there are thousands, literally thousands of properties on the market, hundreds of new build 1 and 2 bedroom apartments, if a 3% is a challenge between liquidity in those markets and not, why are we not seeing those developers offer a 3% reduction in that asking price? And we have actually in some, we've seen 3%, 5%, 10%, and of course, year on year, housing prices have gone down. So I certainly don't buy in regards to the buy-to-let investment market, a 3% surcharge being the reason that sites are not being built. Maybe more systemic issues in the construction industry and the cost of building versus sale across the wider market is. Maybe it's at the concentration of certain types of accommodation in Jersey's housing market put people off investing for themselves or for letting, because that is not the kind of property people want to live in for more than 5 years. But I certainly don't think, sir, that we should put, or without any evidence in front of us, that we should really assume that the fact that 3% is a surcharge on buy-to-let investors is the reason sites are not being developed. And I think we really need to ask for further evidence to that effect. And as I say, we have many sites that could be sold right now that aren't. If 3% is the issues, developers may wish to remove it by 3%, but I see a light on, and I'm sure some of these...
Yeah, sorry, it's a point of clarification, if you don't mind, because...
Prepared to give way?
I will give way, yes.
Yes, Deputy Scott.
Oh, yeah.
Yes?
Deputy Curtis mentioned 3% at one point in value of the property, I think. And another point, he mentioned a 3%, the stamp duty being reflected in a 3% reduction of the asking price. And I don't quite square the 3% with in terms of what's been added to stamp duty, in terms of the actual the actual additions that he's mentioned. So I just would like to understand that better, if you wouldn't mind, how he's mentioned the potential reduction in asking price and also mentioned 3% in property values and how that sort of affects the pricing. Thank you.
Yes, Deputy Curtis.
Well, thank you, sir, and I'm happy to respond to Deputy Scott on that. She may be right. I would have to go through the calculations on stamp duty and the banding charges, but at a simple level, take the worst case. Assume 3% stamp duty is applied entirely on the value of a property and not withdrawing any bands within stamp duty as a surcharge. A property purchased by a buy-to-let investor would be paying, the purchaser would pay a stamp duty surcharge for being a buy-to-let investor to the tune of up to 3%. Therefore, their cost of acquiring that asset is 3% greater. In the case where that is the deterrent in investing in that property, because they see a rental return from that, if an owner of a property wanted to attract a wider market, and the variation between paying at 3% or paying no extra charge on that property is a deterrent factor, then it would suggest that the challenge in the market is properties are 3% too costly for their for obviously the rental return they're looking for, and that a 3% deterrent is sufficient. But of course, we've seen such greater movements in the market over time, and obviously the Deputy will have perhaps a better understanding of the exact stamp duty bracket and the cost implication of a buy-to-let investor, and if she would like to address those costs in a speech, I would love to listen and obviously perhaps ask a point of clarification or indeed clarify my own speech after that. No, and I thank her for that opportunity. But the simple part, and so to close what my remarks are, sir, is that this is not a great deal of money. If the small amount of money that a surcharge puts on a buy-to-let investor is what is causing them not to invest in the large existing stock we have, then I don't see how a change in that will suddenly encourage the viability of approved yet not developed schemes. And I think in the absence of evidence that the sums stack up to convert large numbers of schemes that some members want to see built, then I think we are working on a fair bit of speculation, and I urge members to take caution and to stick with where we are at the 3% for 2025, sir.
Thank you, Deputy. Scott.
Thank you, sir. I will respond to the Deputy's invitation to speak on this. I wasn't intending to, but when it comes to developing a property, it is a question of numbers. And when we talk about 3%, we are looking at what could be quite a considerable sum of money, which has to be taken into account in terms of working out whether it's profitable to continue with the development or not. And I find it very difficult, quite glibly saying, well, that's not a lot of money, if you don't actually look at the actual amount of a site, think about what you can sell it at, what the additional costs are going to be of developing and all the other things that go, planning applications, paying people to actually construct the site. There's a myriad of expenses that have to be taken into account whilst working out a proper plan in which a developer has to decide whether it's worthwhile or not to develop the site. And bearing in mind that some of these sites actually could be providing homes for people. So that's where I find myself taking issue with the Deputy in terms of his former speech, because I just found it doesn't quite deal with the kind of whole complexity with which I think we're very lucky when we do have people who actually will develop properties, to be perfectly honest. There's lots of shabby buildings around that need a lot of work, and to make them more energy efficient and everything, and that indeed takes a certain amount of costing too. So I will maintain that 1% reduction could actually help incentivise people, and it's actually worth having, therefore, when government has actually put forward this amendment, it's actually worth supporting.
Thank you, Deputy. Does any of the members speak on the amendment to the amendment? If no members, Deputy Joseph. Well, your light went on first, Deputy Joseph.
Respond to the Housing Minister.
And I'd like to respond to Deputy Joseph.
I'm calling you to speak first, Deputy Joseph. Your light went on first, in accordance with established practice.
Sir, it's very difficult because some members are arguing for an increase on the surcharge, and they're entitled to their opinion. But I would just maybe cite that this is really an issue for the substantive debate, but there is a difference with the 2% additional surcharge. Say a property is valued at 500,000, but you don't get much for 500,000. The total stamp duty with a 2% surcharge will still be a stamp duty of 12,500. The previous debate would not have affected that anyway, and a further £10,000 on the for the surcharge. Therefore, so the buyer is going to have to pay. It's the buyer that pays. Have to pay a charge of 22,500. So the arguments that I get now, what would be a rental value for a £500,000 property? Well, what's that? That's going to be, you're barely getting, you're barely going to, you're just going to simply get no return at all. And that's quite apart from all of the other costs that you have to do, paying the estate agents and the legal fees and all the rest of it. The difference between the proposal that I'm advancing is £5,000 for that £500,000 property. It's £5,000. And when I can't really, if there are members that simply believe that there is an Atlantis out there where we can simply have a situation where we won't have private sector renters, and I would love people to buy their own homes. I've been a member of this assembly. I think that in my time on finance and economics, etc., we delivered 1,500. I had 4 votes of no confidence when I had to deal with a rezoned site proposition. There were many people voting in St Peter and St Clements on rezoned sites that were really difficult. I'm in favour of home ownership. I'm in favour of it. I've delivered probably hundreds of homes as a result of standing in this assembly in an earlier place. So let there be no doubt at all about my commitment to homeowners. I absolutely believe it. And I'd love to go and interview some of those people whose lives have been changed because they could get into home ownership. But the reality is that we also have people, for whatever their family reasons, whatever their personal circumstances, many of them actually are the very people that we need to work in our public sector services. Many of the people who rent are people who are coming here to work in our health services. They're the people that I am particularly thinking about. And there is a perfectly legitimate reason. I know a couple who sold their own house to allow their daughter to buy their property. They sold their own house to allow their daughter to buy their own property. And so they now rent. They want to rent in the private sector. And those are good examples. And I say to members, in the consideration of whether or not it's a 3% or 2%, the massive disincentive. I've not heard a single member respond to my question about whether there's any investment going into the private sector rental market. Well, the 2021 census had that there were, I got the figures wrong earlier, I apologise. There were 10,739 private sector renters. I asked the Housing Minister about that a few weeks ago, and that doesn't include the then further, I don't think that's me, sir.
Well, it's somebody.
There's a phone around here, but it's not mine, because mine can't get, I don't think it's mine. There may well be one around here, just around this on there. Sorry about that. I'm not criticising my fellow colleagues.
It's annoying. We've heard it before this morning. I'm not quite sure.
Yeah, it's not mine, sir, because mine's off. So there's not what I can do. Possibly use my watch, I don't know. But I don't think so. I'm not getting a running commentary from people, I can tell you. The fact is that there were 7,739 people in private sector rental accommodation. Now, we can't change the world overnight. And I know that there's a view that we need to have, that's an imbalance and that's a lower number, because there's a total of 44,000 numbers of dwellings according to the 2021 census, and that's about, therefore, a quarter of all people that are private sector qualified private rentals. There were at the time 5,000. That is simply not my phone, sir. There were 5,800 social renters. So, and we got 23 home occupiers. I'd love to see more to owner occupiers, but I simply can't. Have. Okay, possibly it's my computer, but I doubt it. It's not connected. I'll see if it's there. It shouldn't be doing that.
You can test it by gradually removing the devices one by one in your facility.
Yeah, I know.
If the speech is long enough, we'll find out what it is.
In a modern world where one uses, where one's supposed to be paperless, one's supposed to be using technology. So I'll just hold it up here and see whether it's that. If it is that, that's a new thing, because it's not connected to any sort of anything else apart from Wi-Fi. There is this issue. We are dealing with. It's not that. It's not that. We are dealing with a situation where we have a very large amount of private sector renters, and we'd love to change things overnight to have more owner-occupants. But some people don't want to do it. They can't afford to do it. And what we've created, as the Sustainable Economic Development Minister said, he knows he's got examples. He's got examples whereby there is investments that are just being put off. We've seen as a result of the Moneyval requirements, there is now virtually no private capital going into the market. The amount of local investors that are now lending money into the local market, apart from the big organisations that can deal with the regulation, I can see the Financial Services Minister agreeing with me and nodding. I think he's nodding at me. There is now a shortage of credit available which was a traditional route that many people in this market did. That's now closed off. There's very little. There's 2 or 3 players, big players in the private rental market. You're not seeing Jersey invested money investing in Jersey because of regulatory problems. So you've got this whole massive, almost perfect storm of events, which it's fine to dream. I dream of an island of people that can afford their own homes. But the practical reality is that this surcharge has created a dearth and a complete disincentive, which is now following through not only with people replacing their homes, they're getting out of private sector rental market, they're selling them. Now, okay, members may like the fact they're buying people's home, but what happens to the renters? What happens to the nurse? I know 3, actually. I know 3 nurses that have come to Jersey that have rented accommodation. They can't get Andim accommodation. They can't get anything else. So they have to go to the private sector market. They haven't got enough money to buy. They're renters. There are loads of them. They're teachers, police officers, people who work in our frontline services. And what are we doing about that? It's fine to dream of something. I dream of the same things that Deputy Ayer wants to do. But I'm also a realist about the reality that you've also got to have a structured and balanced approach, and that it's going to take a long time. And if I was here in a budget debate with a whole series of capital projects and a planning minister and a housing minister working with the Treasury minister in concert to delivering huge demand, I wouldn't be here, but I'm not. We haven't got fiscal stimulus to help the construction industry that's teetering on the brink. And let there be no doubt so. It is. We've seen 3 failures. We're going to see some more. And we're going to see, I just can't believe that we're almost having this sort of fictitious, it's almost like a fictitious debate about the reality of what's going on out there. I don't believe, sir, and I say in all sincerity, I believe the surcharge was well-intentioned. If you believe that you can put in a surcharge and crowd out the private sector market and help everybody get in the market, that's fine. But you can only do that if there's supply. There's no supply. So putting the surcharge is going to constrain, obviously, house purchases for renters. And basically, a 2% doesn't go far enough. It's some way. I'll be pleased if it gets through. It's some way, but it's not far enough. We've created a completely, a perfect storm. No private capital, interest rates set by the Bank of England are higher, more regulation. We've created a perfect storm where there is no market, there's no investment. I can see my friend, the Deputy Chief Minister, nodding at me. I know he's got collective responsibility, but I plug at the heartstrings of the Council of Ministers that really know, I think, what I'm talking about, because I've discussed this with members before. And I'm faced with a situation where I have no resources, I don't have lots of people writing reports for myself, I have to do it by myself, and then members have to listen to me. Well, I hope the members are listening to what I'm saying, because it is true. The private sector rental market matters, and it matters to people that matter to services. And there's a disincentive to which the surcharge brought about. The 2% is not going to cut muster. It's not going to deal with the correction that we need, that the message we've sent out by this perfect storm of events that we're not in favour of private sector rentals. And to do so is basically being cloth-eared to the needs of a certain sector of islanders. It's not bad to be a private sector renter. I'm proud of that lady, of that couple who sold their home and wanted to rent so that they could get there in. But what's the market they can go and rent another home for? Well, it's not good. And if members are in any other in any illusion, and if they're in illusion that somehow Andium is going to own every single social rented house or the Jersey Homes Trust, I think that they're sadly disillusioned. They're not even allowed to get on the ladder because they don't qualify. So I'm afraid to say one has to have a realism and a respect for realism. And this is I'm glad the Council of Ministers has brought forward, I'm glad they're acknowledging it. I don't have any truck with the issues of the costs, because I don't think the costs are relevant to this particular debate, and I'll come back to the main debate, sir.
Do you have a point of order, Deputy Benning, or are you asking to just want to speak in due course, do you? And you want to speak in due course? You've spoken already.
I would ask if the member was, I waited to the end, if he would give way for a point of clarification.
Are you prepared to give way? Yes, Deputy Alex Curtis.
Thank you. The Deputy said that there is no supply of housing. I wonder if he could clarify what he means by there is no supply of housing, given there are over 1,000 properties on the market.
Yes.
Well, we can't have the debate again on the last proposition, but that's the problem. We've got supply with a housing market that's stagnant. We've had that debate and it's been rejected. So the deputy, the point of clarification is a really, it goes to the bullseye of what the problem is. You've got a supply of properties that isn't moving, and we've got people wanting to buy as a ownership. We've had that debate. The states have thrown out that one. Now we've got the reality, and in making the point of correction, I'm delighted to say to the deputy, why is it? Why is it that we've got all these properties that people should be snapping up and getting a good investment from? Because they don't want to, because it's too expensive, because the surcharge is conspiring against them. No rental, no return for the property. People have got money. If people have got savings, if islanders have got savings, they need a return. They're not going to get any return if you've got a surcharge of 2%. Come back to the 3%, get nothing at all. You've got regulation, you've got all the other fees, you get nothing. The deputy's asking, sir, answering his own question. I'm delighted to point out if there's any more helpful points of clarification, because they're making exactly the point that I am pleading with this assembly to listen to, that there is a need to be realistic, to see what's going on. There is a market out there. We've got a housing crisis, lots of supply, nothing more being built. We're in an absolute logjam. I rest my case, sir, on this one. Please, I ask members to not do a half-hearted measure. The time for half actions is not now. The time for action is now, and doing something for 1 year to get the private sector rental market back, because people need it. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Deputy. Is adjournment proposed? Or do you want to carry on?
I'll be less than 5 minutes.
Deputy Mezek.
Thanks, sir. I'm very pleased to have the opportunity to respond to Deputy Ozef, who multiple times in his speech was asking for realism and then gave a speech that didn't contain much of that. So a quick Google search can just demonstrably prove so much of what he said completely wrong. So go on places.je and look up how many properties are available on there to rent. 314 at the moment, and that's not the totality of the picture in Jersey, because not all of them will be there. So I have some news for Deputy Ozef, and this won't be a controversial thing to say, I think, in probably 99% of circumstances in Jersey, but I tell him that most private renters would prefer to be homeowners. Ask them all. So I have friends who are private renters, none of them want to be so, they want to be homeowners. And his portrayal of what that life is like for people Obviously, sir, private renting plays an important part in the housing delivery for the island. It always will, and there are circumstances where that's perfectly right for people. But if you ask people what they feel in their hearts, people would prefer to be homeowners because they like the security that comes with that and they like what it offers them. Sir, I have always been supportive of a stamp duty surcharge for investment purchases. My record shows that. I voted in line with that position. I voted in line with a higher stamp duty surcharge percentage than that which was eventually adopted, and I maintain the consistency in that position. I agree completely with what Deputy Reniff said, that the policy has worked, and the most recent house price index revealed that from the change from 2023 to 2024 for investment purchases, it went from 27% of all purchases down to 11%, and the proportion of first-time buyers went up from 18 to 27%, exactly what we want to be seeing. So there, of course, is a debate to be had on what the optimum percentage for the surcharge is. Maybe it's 3%, maybe it's higher, maybe it's lower in terms of getting the optimum outcome that we're after. I don't know what it is, but I certainly know, sir, that it's not 0%, which is why I can wholeheartedly support the government amendment to this, to take the worst option off the table. We will be abolishing the advantage that we deliberately tried to give to first-time buyers and to people wanting to buy homes, to own them, to live in them, and creating what in practice will not be a level playing field, because those trying to buy their first home don't have capital that they can leverage for debt to buy that property, unlike the investors. And I guess so just the final point I'll make is that with falling house prices, that benefits investors too. In fact, they've probably benefited as absolute amount more by the fall in house prices than they would by cutting the 3% stamp duty in terms of absolute amounts. So that trend benefits investors as well as those, but it just keeping the surcharge maintains that advantage that homeowners have and ought to continue having. That has my full support, and that's why I'll vote in favour of an amendment, sir, to get the worst option off the table.
Thank you, Deputy. Adjournment's proposed. The members as Deputy Chief Minister.
I'm just wondering if it would be wise for the Treasury Minister to sum up if there are more speakers before lunch.
There are more speakers. We've got the Conotab of Greville and Deputy Tom Binney.
I second the proposal of the Adjournment.
Deputy Sadier.
It's just a technical point. If we've got screens on here at the moment which are using up electricity but not displaying any time, so could we either get them fixed or switched off?
They're being fixed over lunch.
Thank you, sir. I might have missed that earlier, sorry.
215? Ah, yes.
So, briefly, I wasn't going to speak on the topic. I just wanted to raise the defo on the Conotable St Wands, who has joined us online. It seems a bit odd just before the adjournment, but he is actually present, sir.
Members content to raise the defo? The defo is raised. Deputy Rob Ward.
So I was going to raise a point. I just wonder if you could consider over lunchtime Standing Order 104 Part 2, where members unduly repeat his or her own arguments. We've seen lots of repetition today, and things are going on a long time. I think we can be more concise in what we're doing. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Deputy. I'll do that. Adjourn till 2:15.